Chapter 367. This is actually going to be more fun than I thought. A smirk appeared on Gustav's face as he recalled some of the information. Looks like I can truly use this means to finally get rid of that brat, Gustav thought. According to the guidelines, once in every 3 months, a cadet could fix a deathmatch with another cadet. Both cadets must agree before the deathmatch could hold. But this didn't seem to be a problem to Gustav, remembering how much he and Indrik despised each other. A frown appeared on Gustav's face a moment later as he recalled something. He still hasn't been given a change of surrounding. The MBO training camp will be the best place for him to learn humility since he's not the only one who's special. Angie's words during their date rang in his mind. I've given him a chance before, there's no harm in giving him one more. After thinking about it repeatedly, he decided to compromise to Angie's words. A sudden memory popped into his mind. What's with this? Gustav sighed as he recalled Angie's hand placed on his on their way here. He just realized that he was aware of her palm on his hand the whole time as he recalled the softness. He didn't understand why such a memory that seemed quite meaningless played out in his mind, but he quickly discarded it. He raised the device and continued reading the guidelines, rules, and regulations. There were things such as how cadets were not allowed to battle with one another outside of the training grounds, and how killing fellow cadets was not allowed unless it was a death battle. The MBO trainers would give the first years all types of training in the first year, but on getting to the second year, they'd be given a test that would determine their placement within the MBO and the lessons that will be slashed out or retained. The special class had extra training classes apart from the regular ones. Gustav found another piece of interesting information. It was possible for a normal cadet to become a special class by defeating a special class in the annual, monthly challenge. In this challenge, 3 normal cadets are given the opportunity of challenging a special class cadet. Anyone who wins takes the privileges, as well as the winning condition of that particular special class. Their positions in the camp get switched. Gustav finished reading the guidelines, rules, and regulations in the next 30 minutes and decided to go shower. As he stood underneath the shower, he remembered parting ways with Miss Amy at the base. I guess this is it, kid, for now, she said as she smiled at him. I hope to see you soon, Miss Amy. Although 2 years is a bit long, Gustav nodded as he returned her smile. I'll get across to you after gathering the information you want, she added. Gustav nodded in response as they turned around to head to separate locations. After moving a few steps forward, Gustav paused his steps and turned around. Miss Amy, he called out to her. Miss Amy also paused her steps and turned around. Thank you for everything, Gustav shouted out as he bent his back with a look of appreciation. Miss Amy had a surprised look on her face at first before a warm smile appeared. If you're grateful, then don't let me down. Become the best and defeat anyone who stands in your way, Miss Amy said before turning around to keep moving. We'll meet again, by Gustav, Miss Amy muttered underneath her breath as she kept walking forward. Gustav kept staring at her back as her figure grew more distant. His face was full of complex expressions as he turned around to follow the rest of the cadets. Gustav had a look of determination on his face as he recalled this. She also wants me to become the best, Gustav said internally. Good thing there is also training on intergalactic missions and a library here. I need as much knowledge as I can gather. The next day, the cadets were awoken by the sound of the morning alarm that reverberated across the entire training camp residence. It was still 5:30 in the morning. However, the new cadets had seen this in the guidelines, so they knew what this alarm meant. Gustav was already awake before the alarm rang out. Swoosh! He dashed out of his room along with other new cadets on this floor. Gustav, Falco. The 3 of them called out to one another the instant they met up in the corridor. 30 seconds to get to the coal track, Falco voiced out. It's on the map. Let's move, said as he opened a large vortex and the 3 of them dashed in. VRHHH. They appeared outside in an instant on the path that led out of the Dragon residential area. Opened another vortex, and the 3 of them went in again. About 10 seconds later, they arrived on a field surrounded by nothing but grasses. A forest of tall trees could be seen up south and a high mountain after the forest. Every one of the first years arrived one after the other. 3 people in black MBO uniforms stood in front, waiting for everyone's arrival. The projection of a timer was being displayed above, and only 10 seconds were left according to the countdown. There were about 1,200 cadets here at the moment, and more were still flooding in. Some teleported here at the final seconds, while some ran with their full speed activating their bloodline. The timer finished counting down, and one of the officers moved forward to stand behind all the cadets that had arrived. Her eyes glowed a purple light as she swiped her palm forward. SSHHRRHHHH. A long line appeared behind the participants that had arrived during the 30 seconds countdown. Every other participant that was just arriving noticed that they couldn't join the participants in front. An invisible barrier was stopping them from moving further than the line that was drawn on the ground. Chapter 368. They couldn't go around the line because it extended as far as eyes could see. The female officer stepped forward as she voiced out, "You're late? Double morning workout for you all," she voiced out while pointing at them. The ones at the front had no idea what they were going to do yet, but they were sure that double workout wouldn't be difficult for mixed bloods that were already beyond the Zulu rank. The lady officer in front made sure to mark the faces of the latecomers and even remained in front of them. Now that everyone has arrived at the morning workout session, a bald man voiced out from the front, "I am Officer Bryant, your instructor. These two are my assistants, Officer Sasha and Ibrahim," he added while pointing at the female officer behind and the male officer beside him. Gustav recognized this man from Officer Bryant that he met the other day. "Now, I want you all to feast your eyes on these images," he voiced out as the projection above changed from a timer into a picture of a landscape. The first picture was that of the forest up front. After that, it displayed the mountain, and after that, it was the picture of a small river that was over 5,000 feet in length. After that was a highland that led to a cliff area in which there were several ropes tied to which led to the top of another mountain. From there, a route down the mountain could be seen, which led to a plain field, and that plain field led back to where they were standing. Now, you see these images displayed are landscapes of the places you have to pass through to complete your morning workout routine, he explained. "You all have to go round and come back to this same spot," he said while pointing at the forest up ahead. The cadets stared at one another with a look of delight. "So easy. I'll be the first to get back. No, I'll be the first, hee. I really thought it was going to be something tougher. Didn't we do something similar to this during the test phase?" Some of them voiced out after understanding the routine. "Knowing the MBO, this probably isn't as simple as it looks," Gustav said internally with a suspicious expression. "Good. Now that you all understand," Officer Bryant said with a smirk as he rolled up his right sleeves. Greary-eye, bluish tattoos started appearing all over his right arm. What's he doing?" everyone wondered. Swoosh. Officer Bryant suddenly dashed forward and tapped the first person on the right. Pa, 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 huh. The cadets were surprised as they felt his tap on their shoulders, one after the other. No single person, no matter how fast, could escape his hand as he managed to tap every single person. Angie didn't try to dodge because she could tell he didn't mean to harm anyone. Same with Gustav, although Gustav wasn't even fast enough to dodge. Everyone noticed the blue round mark that appeared on their right palm afterwards. In the next seconds, their eyes widened as they felt their bloodlines losing power. "Yash, you all must have felt it by now. I just sealed your bloodlines," Officer Bryant stated as he arrived back in their front. Lots of disgruntled voices reverberated across the place as they heard that. HM, you all are required to go through this routine every day without using any form of bloodline abilities or taking strength from bloodline activation. You're going through this as ordinary humans would do, he stated with a smile. What? This is absurd. How do you expect us to go through that without our bloodline abilities? Someone voiced out from the crowd, and other cadets also voiced their disagreement. All I know is y'all got 3 hours. After 3 hours, your bloodlines begins to degrade if I don't take the seal off, he stated. More complaints could be heard after Officer Bryant stated that. Most of them felt powerless without their bloodlines and wondered how they were supposed to perform incredible feats like going through this crazy routine without them. Aside from this, the sky was still dimly lit because of the time, so some of them were scared of going through the dark forest without their abilities. Zing, zing. 2 chairs appeared behind Officer Bryant, and he proceeded to take his seat before starting the countdown. He looked unbothered as he crossed his legs, smiled, and chatted with his subordinate. Gustav and two other cadets were the first to break off from the crowd as they started jogging towards the direction of the small forest up ahead. EE and Falco wasted no time in following behind him. The other special classes and some cadets broke out of the crowd at the exact same time too and started running in the direction of the forest. Those who were complaining figured they were just wasting time as they noticed the countdown and quickly started running towards the forest areas also. In a few more seconds, the place had been cleared up as thousands of cadets could be seen running towards the forest area in front. Dust and sand spread across the place as thousands of feet drummed on the path that led there. Officer Bryant tapped a few buttons on a controller he just brought out, and more projections appeared above them, displaying footage of the forest the cadets were running towards. Officer Bryant sure is nice. If it was her, she'd have slapped a few of them senseless already, Ibrahim said with a hard tone. Haha, I'm not as edgy as she is, but I truly pity these kids. I wonder how most of them are going to survive through her training. Officer Bryant rubbed his shiny bald head as he responded. Anyways, let's see what they're capable of without abilities, he added as he stared at the footage that displayed the entrance of the forest. The cadets were now beginning to enter the forest. Gustav passed by the first tree on the path to entering the forest. Should I deactivate the seal? The system suddenly asked. Chapter 369. Should I deactivate the seal? The system suddenly asked. You can? Gustav asked with a slightly surprised look as he kept running. With not much effort, yes, the system responded. Nah, I think this is a good training method, Gustav declined after a brief moment of contemplation. Gustav could feel that only his original bloodline was sealed, but he still had strength streaming in from the other bloodlines, which was why at the moment, he was way ahead of everyone. I'd like for you to also suppress all my other bloodlines too, and restrict my stats in the meantime, Gustav decided. Are you serious? You really want me to do that? The system was a bit surprised that Gustav would ask for such. Yes, or this training will end up being meaningless, Gustav responded internally. Oh, all right then, the system replied. Sealing usage of bloodlines. Bloodline sealed successfully. Restricting host stats. Stats restricted successfully. Gustav suddenly felt his strength being sapped as those notifications appeared in his line of vision. His speed slowed down, but he still kept running. So I'm currently making use of my original strength without the bloodlines and system-added stats, Gustav thought as he jumped over a fallen tree log and kept running. His jump over managed to get him across 7 feet. It's not as bad as I thought it would be, Gustav said internally. His current strength and stamina without any ability or system stats was still higher than that of any athlete in the past before bloodlines were a thing. This was mostly due to the fact that the abilities and everyday training had already impacted his body, so even if he lost it he wouldn't be as weak as he used to be. His chest was heaving up and down as he ran across the forest. Huh! Gustav exclaimed as he felt his footstep on a panel. Dwowil. In the next moment, a 3 meters tree came flying out of nowhere, arriving in front of him in almost an instant. Gustav still had quick reflexes, but right now, his speed was lacking. However, he still managed to grab hold of the tree before it slammed into him. Swee-hi-hi! Gustav's entire body was sent flying backwards as he slammed into a tree behind. Grrhh! Gustav felt so much pain as his back slammed into the tree. Swai! Swai! 2 of the other cadets that dashed out of the encirclement at the same time he did, passed by his left and right side and kept running forward. Both of them turned their heads to the side to stare at Gustav as he remained in his position. So it was him. The girl with pigtails and a purple-colored hair tie around her head said internally as she spotted Gustav. This was the same girl known as the strongest first-year cadet to some participants, Elevra. The other person was a guy with light blonde hair. Gustav recognized him to be the same guy that talked down on him in the corridor the day before. Chad. Chad made a low humph sound as he turned to look forward and kept running. Of course, Elevra also didn't slow down for a second and also kept running. Gustav continued sitting there for a few seconds letting others overtake him. EE and Falco arrived a few moments later, along with Angie and the other girls. Don't worry about me, Keep going, I'll just rest here for a bit, Gustav said to them. They all stared at him with a look of uncertainty. Go. We'll be right behind you guys, Gustav said to them once again. They had no choice but to listen since Gustav wouldn't budge. A few moments later, Gustav picked himself up. So that's how pain without defense feels like. There are also traps set all across the place. Lots of people will fall to it, which will end up decreasing the amount of traps left. I don't have to hurry since it's not a competition of who arrives first. I just need to get there before 3 hours are up. This was Gustav's line of thinking as he started running once again. Tap, 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 tap. The sounds of feet tapping on the forest ground full of leaves, broken branches, and fallen trees reverberated across the place. Gustav just kept running at a moderate speed without the intention of overtaking anyone. Oh, that's Gustav. I must surpass him. Someone voiced out from behind and started chasing after Gustav. He arrived on Gustav's right side a few moments later, but Gustav didn't even spare him a glance. Looks like without your bloodline you're just so-so. He laughed lightly as he started overtaking Gustav. Gustav didn't bother replying. He just kept looking around. He noticed something off up ahead and moved further towards the side. The person who was currently overtaking him kept running forward, and the instant he arrived in between the two trees up ahead, massive webs appeared out of thin air. His body got wrapped in the webs, and it pulled backwards, trapping him within before shooting him out like a catapult. Swee-hi-hi! The cadet screamed loudly as his body was sent flying through the air. He was being shot backwards. Gustav had already passed by the side of the tree on the left. He showed no expression whatsoever to what had just happened and kept running forward. After a few more minutes, he could see the steep rocky slope up ahead. Some of the cadets had already begun climbing with their hands and legs as support. There was no equipment whatsoever, and the rocky mountain happened to be up to 1,000 feet tall. Huff, huff, huff. Gustav panted as he arrived before the rock and looked up. Just as he thought, Elevira was first, Chad and Eldris were in second, only about 5 feet beneath her. And some other special class cadets were not too far off. Some of them had already climbed higher than 70 feet. This one definitely has traps too, Gustav said internally as he squinted his eyes. Just as that thought came to his mind, someone who had reached a height of 20 feet placed their hand on a rock. SHHHSZZHH. An opening appeared, and a pole shot out of the hole. The cadet was hit in the guts and sent tumbling down the steep rocky mountain. Chapter 370. Bang! He landed a few feet from Gustav's position and screamed out in pain while rolling across the floor with a bleeding right arm. Gustav only stared at him for an instant before he started climbing. He kept fixed his eyes on the routes that the others had taken and followed the ones that climbed up safely. As Gustav reached a height of 40 feet, a loud scream was heard. Kairar! Gustav looked up and noticed someone falling from above. Bam! Bam! The person's body slammed into 2 people on the same climbing route and was headed towards Gustav's spot. Gustav was about to jump away when he recognized this person to be Matilda. Gustav turned his body to the side and pressed his back against the small hole on the surface of the rock before stretching out his hand. Grab. He grabbed onto Matilda's left hand just as her body reached his position. GHHRR. Gustav growled as he made use of his left hand to hold onto the pointed rock on the side and held her with his right hand. Matilda looked up and noticed that she was caught by Gustav. Her face beamed up with happiness as Gustav pulled her up while grunting. She grabbed hold of a pointy part of the rocky mountain and supported her weight herself. Thanks, Gustav, she muttered with an appreciative look. H&M, it's no problem, Gustav said as he placed his left palm on his right shoulder with a slight look of pain. Let me help you with that, Matilda said and grabbed hold of Gustav's right shoulder before pressing and pushing against it. A loud pop resounded from his shoulder area as his dislocated joint returned back to normal. Gustav made a muffled, painful noise and shook his arm before breathing in and out profusely. Thanks, Gustav muttered as he felt the pain begin to reduce. No, I'm the one who should be grateful, Matilda said with a look of gratitude. Let's go, Gustav said as he grabbed hold of another part of the rocky mountain up and pulled himself up. Make sure to follow the route of those up ahead. Gustav instructed as he started climbing. Matilda also began to climb and followed Gustav's instructions. By now, the cadets had realized that every course was going to have traps, so they trod carefully. However, even though the accidents decreased drastically, there was still the issue of energy and stamina. Even after 20 minutes had passed, no one was yet to reach the top. Alevra was still the first at the moment. She had scaled over 600 feet of the rocky mountain, but there was around 400 feet to scale. Gustav currently had climbed to a height of 500+ feet and paused again to catch his breath. His muscles were feeling sore at the moment, and crystalline beads of sweat rolled down his face. This side of the mountain was practically a wall. However, it was a bit slanted, so the cadets were able to pause and catch their breaths so long as they could balance their bodies on the rocky mountain properly. Gustav stared at the bottom of the rocky mountain and the forest behind from this point. It was now quite distant as the trees looked like shrubs. The sun had also begun to poke its head out of the dark sky, causing the temperature of the surroundings to increase. He wasn't scared in the slightest of falling from this height, even though he currently couldn't make use of his abilities. Some cadets had fallen a while ago due to unseen traps, but before they could hit the ground, some small drone-like devices with arms grabbed hold of them to prevent their death. The only problem was, these flying drones with arms carried them back deep into the forest before dropping them. So now they practically had to continue from there, as if climbing the over 1,000 feet tall mountain wasn't torture enough. Lots of cadets also paused at this point, but the moment some of them remembered that they were on a timer, they continued to climb. After a few moments of rest, Gustav began to climb again. At this point, Alevra had given Eldris and Chad a gap of close to 50 feet. She didn't pause once and kept climbing. Those below had looks of astonishment as they stared at her small figure high above. Just what sort of monstrosity is she? Most of them wondered because even other special class paused to rest at some point. Gustav continued on the trail of others and kept climbing even with his sore muscles that were becoming stiff with every pull. He seemed to have a lot of stamina because he also didn't pause since he started climbing. The only difference was he wasn't as fast. However, he was close to reaching Eldris and Chad's current height. Glade wasn't too far off while Falco was struggling tremendously to pull himself up after reaching the height of 400 feet. He and Angie weren't too far from one another. Gustav had passed Angie's height some time back, but didn't even notice her since there were 100 others climbing all around him. Angie, on the other hand, saw him earlier and was about to call out to him when she stopped herself. Currently, she looked up again and raised her trembling hands before grabbing onto a piece of rock and pulling herself upwards. Her body vibrated due to fatigue as she struggled to pull herself up. Sweat rolled down her face, but her eyes still lit up with determination. All of a sudden, the rock she placed her hand on next pulled out of the rocky mountain. Krrhhyy. She quickly grabbed onto another using her left hand before she lost her balance, but the moment she grabbed onto that side, it also pulled out of the rocky mountain. Krrhhyy. Angie lost balance and found herself falling through the air a moment later. "No," Angie voiced out with a look of despair while falling. Everyone beneath moved out of the way as they noticed the body falling through the air. "Angie!" Falco shouted out, but it was too late. Her body was already descending at a fast speed. Gustav paused his movement up above and looked down. He noticed the small, getting even smaller as it descended into the distance. Looks like another person fell to a trap, Gustav thought. Chapter 371. A moment later, he turned to look up and continued climbing. After another 30 minutes went by, Gustav arrived at the top of the mountain with a body full of sweat and aching muscles. He laid on the mountain top like others who had just arrived. The top of the rocky mountain was rough-looking and full of large, bumpy rock fragments scattered all around. After a few more seconds of catching his breath, Gustav started running forward once again. His thighs felt really heavy, but he still pushed himself to raise both legs and throw them forward. Gustav arrived at the other end of the rocky mountain top in about 2 minutes and looked down only to see a foggy, abysmal view. The bottom of the mountain couldn't be seen from this end. It looked very deep, as if a person would keep falling forever if they slipped from this edge. There were ropes tied to small metal bars that protruded from the ground of the mountain top. These ropes extended far into the distance, leading to another mountain, atop several hundred feet away. It might have been possible for some of the cadets to leap to the other side before, but without their abilities, it was impossible for them to perform such feats right now. Gustav arrived in front of the line and looked ahead. He couldn't see anyone on this line up ahead because they were only a few cadets who had reached this point. On the sides, some cadets could be seen squatting as they reached out and held onto the rope with their hands. Some of them kicked the lower part of their body off the edge of the mountain top and made use of their hands to support their entire body as they started moving forward with the rope. Some of them hugged their legs around the rope and pulled their body forward using their arms. While only a few people like Gustav balanced their feet on the rope as they moved forward one step at a time. Gustav steadied his breathing as he put one foot in front of the other. Both of his arms were outstretched as he recalled his training with Miss Amy about balance. Those who were also walking on one of the ropes looked focused as they moved one step at a time. Hundreds of feet ahead on the rope towards Gustav was left. Alevra held out a book and read as she walked effortlessly on the rope. She walked the line like she was walking on the ground and didn't even bother staring down or anywhere else. Her balance was totally flawless. Gustav was also moving quite faster than others while walking on the rope, but Alevra was the fastest. Gustav could tell that there wouldn't be any traps laid out here because walking on the rope was already enough of a challenge. A lot of cadets were moving at a snail's pace, and some of them were struggling to pull themselves forward due to fatigue. Gustav stared at both sides and below. He wondered what was at the bottom of the mountain on this side due to the immense depth. Aha! A loud scream rang out as a cadet lost strength in his arms and started falling after letting go of the rope. Gustav only stared for a few moments and saw the person's body disappearing into the abysmal fog below. A few seconds later, the same person was lifted back up by some mechanical drones. He seemed to have passed out from the way his body was flayed in the winds as he was lifted out of the fog and taken backward towards the mountain area. Gustav had continued walking at this point. Minutes later, he was closing in on the edge of the other mountain top. He finally arrived there a few moments later and started running down the sloppy mountain. This one wasn't steep like the one on the other side, so it was quite easy to descend. Gustav dodged the hurdles on the path as he ran down. In about 2 minutes, he reached the mountain part that was cut off from the bottom. It was only about 20 feet away from the bottom, but what awaited them was a 5,000 feet wide river that covered everywhere. Gustav kept running and jumped straight into the river. Splash! Other cadets also arrived there and jumped in while some had arrived earlier. Gustav started swimming forward with as much speed as he could muster. He started passing those that had gone beyond him and slowly closed those at the forefront. He could see EE in the distance and a few of the other special class recruits. All of them had so much stamina that they didn't pause once to catch a break as they swam. Gustav looked around for potential traps, but to his surprise, no one had fallen to any trap even after they had been swimming for several minutes. Gustav calculated the time they had spent so far and realized that only around 30 minutes were left. He sped up and stopped reserving his energy. Those that had surpassed him earlier had looks of confusion. They had really thought Gustav slowing down earlier was due to the fact that he was very weak without his bloodline. Some of them pushed themselves too, not wanting to be left behind. As they saw it as a competition, while Gustav only saw it as a new method of training. At this point, Gustav's arms and legs were very sore from waving and kicking within the water, but he wanted to make sure he got there before the 3 hours time limit. Although he knew the system could deactivate the seal at any time, he still wanted that 3 hours to be his daily goal and surpass it eventually. That girl seems pretty strong. Gustav could see Alevra's body outline in the distance. She was still in first position and even more than 50 feet ahead of the next two. Chapter 372. Gustav was about 200 feet behind. After another 10 minutes passed, and they arrived in the middle of a forest-like area. But it was very dense with only a few trees, and there was an outlined curvy path in front. This path was cleared out for them to run through. The moment everyone got out of the river, they started running on the curvy path. This was the last section to pass through before arriving back at their starting point. Gustav pushed himself forward, knowing that only a few more 100 meters were left. Some cadets were only walking at this point and panting heavily. Some came out of the river and laid on the ground due to fatigue. However, some were still able to muster the energy to keep running. Gustav picked up speed and started catching up to the special class cadets ahead, who were obviously also fatigued since they were slowing down with each step. Tap, 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 tap. Several 10 feet, tapping on the surface of the tiled path rang out. Gustav arrived on the side of the special class cadet behind and eventually overtook him. He kept speeding up as he ran and overtook a few more of them. A minute later, they could see the plain field they had started the race from up ahead. At this point, Gustav was right beside EE, and both of them shared a nod and a quick fist bump as they ran forward, overtaking Eldris and Chad. Eldris smiled and nodded at Gustav as he kept running while a frown appeared on Chad's face as he glared at Gustav. However, he could feel himself running out of energy, so even though he tried, he couldn't overtake both of them. Minutes later, Gustav was lying on the ground as sweat dribbled down his face, and his clothes stuck to his body due to the immense sweat his body had oozed out. He wasn't the only one. Other cadets were also on the ground panting heavily due to being out of breath. Some of them were complaining about how sore their arms were and how this was a death routine. A bright smile appeared on Commander Bryant's face as he stood up from his seat and walked towards the few that had just arrived. He stared at them and looked forward at the rest that was limping towards them as fast as they could, even though they were out of breath. "Good job," Officer Bryant voiced out as he noted their faces one after the other. Obviously, the first to arrive was the special class cadets that were about 50 in number. All of them were out of breath except for Elevera, who looked extremely fatigued. She also had sweat on her visible body parts, but she was nowhere as tired as the others. She wasn't even panting, neither did she look for a place to sit like the others. The others stared at her with a defeated expression. She was currently holding a small book and reading its content. "You all arrived 17 to 20 minutes before the time limit. That's not bad at all," Officer Bryant voiced out as he snapped his fingers. "Pa." The bluish mark on their right palm faded away in an instant. Everyone held their hands up and stared at themselves as they felt their bloodlines being unsealed. Gustav felt his strength returning and all the injuries and soreness reduced before eventually disappearing. Gustav's regeneration had returned him back to normal, so all the pain was gone in a few seconds. Others were still looking tired, but they had regained the energy to move their formerly stiff muscles as they will. After all, not everyone was blessed with regeneration like Gustav. "Here are med shots for those who suffered injury." Commander Bryant pointed at the rectangular crate on the ground not too far from his position. "Taking this will make you feel even more tired, but you will be healed from your injuries," he added. Those who were injured moved over to take the cylindrical-shaped orange-colored object and injected themselves. Cuts and bruises they had gained closed up immediately, and they stopped bleeding. However, they did feel even more tired afterward. Some of them that knew Gustav fell to a trap at the beginning wondered why he didn't go and take a med shot, not knowing that at the moment, he didn't have a single scratch on his body. Everyone that had arrived had to wait till the time was up. Only around 900 people managed to make it here before the time was up. There were still hundreds of other cadets struggling to arrive. Officer Bryant started addressing them when the time was up. "Now since it's you, youngsters, first time trying out the daily routine session, all other morning training sessions will be canceled for the next 1 week. I expect everyone to get used to this after 1 week has gone by," Officer Bryant voiced out. "Everyone should prepare to be addressed by noon at the main hall. Commander Cilia, the head authority of the MBO camp, will be there," he added before turning around to leave. The other male officer followed him while the female officer remained behind. Officer Sasha directed the late one to our command center for the deactivation of the seal. He instructed while waving from ahead without turning around. The cadets started leaving the place as well. Officer Sasha walked forward and stared at the faces of some cadets before preventing them from leaving. "You're among those that arrived late today. Start your second lap of the morning routine," she voiced out with an unmerciful tone. Those involved had looks of horrors as they pleaded with loud voices. Gustav stood to his feet to leave when E.E. called out to him from behind. "Angie and Falco have not arrived," he stated with a tone of worry. Matilda and Glade also came forward. They had the same complaints. "I have checked for them as well. They're not here," Matilda added. We'll be having little time skips. Chapter 373. I have checked for them as well. They're not here, Matilda added. They all stared at Gustav with a look of anticipation, waiting for his decision. However, to their surprise, Gustav turned around to continue leaving. They'll show up eventually, he voiced out as he kept walking forward. Wait, what? He voiced out with a look of surprise. Gustav ignored their stares behind and kept walking forward. Hold up, you jerk! Glade shouted out from behind and walked towards Gustav. How could you just walk away? We have to go and find them, Glade said with a disgruntled voice. Gustav paused his steps and turned around. It's called training for a reason. There are things you can't help them with, or you'll just be stunting their growth. They have to do this on their own just like we did, Gustav said before turning back around and leaving. Glade stared daggers at his figure that was turning distant and distant. Selfish jerk. She turned around and started walking forward. I'm going to look for them. Yo, Gus. He voiced out as he stretched out his hand with a conflicted expression. He moved a step forward and then turned back to stare at Glade, who was walking in the opposite direction. He was at a loss on who to follow, but after a brief contemplation and seeing Matilda follow Glade, he decided to join in too. The four of them started heading back in the direction of the path that led to the river area. Now where do you three think you're going? Officer Sasha voiced out as she noticed them. Arrived on the path that led to the residential areas and observed the structures in the vicinity. Currently, he was on his way to a particular spot he marked on the map earlier. In the vicinity, different structures for different purposes like bloodline testing, grading, enhancement, training centers, mechanical weaponry could be seen as Gustav moved forward. Cadets moved across the place also. It was quite crowded, and Gustav could tell when he passed by a senior cadet due to the difference in bearing and how they carried themselves. Whenever a senior cadet passed by his side, they would always glance at him with respect due to the scar on his left chest area. They obviously knew about how rankings worked, so they mistook Gustav for an officer even though he was dressed in a white cadet uniform like them. What they didn't take into consideration was the fact that Gustav was weaker than they were currently. Alevra took first place from what I heard after getting back to the starting point. Gustav Crimson and a special class named East were in second place and all the other special classes were right behind them. The special class cadets arrived earlier than everyone else. They're all monsters. It might be true that Gustav isn't actually the strongest from what I've seen. What are you talking about? We haven't even seen her perform any feat with her bloodline abilities yet. Some group of first-year cadets that Gustav just passed by were talking and arguing about today's morning routine. Even though their bloodlines had been unsealed, everyone was still tired and was heading towards their residence to rest in the meantime. It was currently around 9 in the morning, so they had 3 hours of break before the General Assembly at noon. This Alevra girl. Their conversation drifted into Gustav's hearing. He wasn't bothered that some people felt he wasn't the strongest or whatever. He didn't even care about their arguments. But he was intrigued about Alevra because she seemed quite special, even among the special class. The few times he saw her, he could tell. Eldris and Chad also gave him the same vibe, especially Eldris, who has never opened his eyes since they met. Gustav wondered if Eldris was blind. However, if Eldris was blind, how does he move around the surroundings so easily? If he could see, why were his eyes closed every time, and how does he move around with closed eyes? These were the thoughts on not only Gustav's mind but many other cadets. Only a few had witnessed Eldris open his eyes, and even they couldn't describe what they witnessed properly. Gustav threw all this to the back of his mind for now, and kept journeying towards the spot on the map that read, Science Block. This part of the training camp was where those who were enlisted into the MBO for scientific potential were being trained. These ones were youngsters with scientific feats that were being trained to join the MBO experimental department in the future, so they could make serums, drugs, and other products. Mostly scientific researches and breakthroughs that can better the performance of the MBO in the future. This department also gets sent on battle missions to assist the operatives sometimes. In a few more minutes, Gustav arrived at the science block. He walked to the front of one of their labs that was 3 stories tall and shaped to look like a test tube. He stood on the side and sat in front to wait. Gustav recalled that he needed to get his 3 gadgets from the weapons vault later on also, so he decided to go after he was done here. He sat down and waited for about 15 minutes before the cadets started streaming out of the building. A few seconds later, he sighted a beautiful and slim-looking girl with an oval-shaped face and deep red hair. The moment he stood up, this girl sighted him as well. "Gustav!" She screeched and ran towards him. Gustav noticed her approach and smiled as he moved towards her also. "Grab." She locked Gustav in a tight embrace the moment she arrived in front of him. Gustav normally wouldn't like to be grabbed like this, but this time he let it happen. "Mara, I'm surprised you still remember me even though I only showed up once," Gustav said as they separated from each other. "How is that even possible? You're everywhere, on the news on big screens in the city. Besides that, you're my grandfather's favorite and our very own hero," Mara voiced out with a jovial smile. "So you're not mad?" Gustav asked. "No, why would I be? On the contrary, I'm thankful. Thank you for clearing my grandfather's name. He called me to explain everything. You're awesome," she added with a smile. Gustav only smiled back. He didn't know how to reply to such heartwarming gratitude and pure compliments. "Come, let's go somewhere," Mara said and pulled Gustav along with her as they walked into the distance. About an hour and a half later, Gustav returned back to his apartment and sat in his personal meditation room to channel his bloodline. Luckily for him, today's system's daily tasks were attuned with the morning routine, so he managed to finish 2 of the tasks by completing the morning routine. The third one was what he was currently doing. He had spent an hour and a half with Boss Danzo's granddaughter, and it was quite an interesting experience. The MBO cadets that were enlisted for scientific purposes had already been brought here 2 weeks back, so she had been here since that time. Gustav realized that she was actually quite the genius. In just the short time spent here, she had started her dream scientific projects due to having enough materials and funding from the MBO. She took Gustav to the workshop she acquired from a competition with one of the geniuses here and showed him the things she had been working on. Gustav was pleasantly surprised and saw even more reason to watch over her. At first, he was only doing it for Boss Danzo, but now he had realized her potential as a science genius, so he was convinced it wasn't a wasted effort. Gustav continued focusing on channeling his bloodline for the next 1 hour. Although the speed of increasing the density of the bloodline had decreased, bloodline channeling was now smoother for him. He only needed to channel his original bloodline for the rest to be affected. Just when it was 30 minutes to noon, Gustav stopped. He remembered that Recreation had upgraded, and he wished to put the new upgraded edition to use. However, Gustav suddenly thought of something. "Hey system, is there a limit to how many bloodlines I can be paired with?" he asked inwardly. "Why are you asking such a dumb question? Of course there's a limit. There's a limit to everything, much less your weak mortal body," the system responded while dishing out insults. "What? Why didn't you ever tell me about it?" Gustav asked with his forehead creased in disappointment. You would have figured out eventually if you tried stealing 5 more bloodlines," it responded with a condescending tone and kept quiet afterward. 5 more bloodlines. That means I can only plunder 38 bloodlines in total currently," Gustav sighed. His aim at first had been to become the #1 bloodline robber in the world, and now he was finding out that he had a limit to how many bloodlines he could plunder. "Dumbo. You can plunder as many bloodlines as you please, but you can't pair more than that particular amount with yourself," the system stated. What? Chapter 374. Dumbo. You can plunder as many bloodlines as you please, but you can't pair more than that particular amount with yourself, the system stated. What? Gustav exclaimed with a slightly uncertain look. Are you saying I can steal infinite bloodlines, but can only pair around 38 bloodlines with myself? Precisely that, the system responded. I see, but then what will be the point of plundering bloodlines that I can't make use of? Gustav wondered out loud. What are you asking me for? You have options. To combine or to give them to someone else, the system voiced out internally. With the new level up of Recreation, I can combine 3 bloodlines at the same time. But what do you mean by giving them to someone else? Gustav voiced out. Sigh, you haven't been paying attention to bloodline acquisition, have you? The system stated. Gustav realized that this was accurate. Since he leveled up bloodline acquisition to the point where he could steal grade bloodlines, he stopped paying attention to it. He now recalled that it was at level 5, and from his knowledge about video games, if a skill had reached its highest potential, it would have the word max in front. Since the system interface was based on Earth's old video games, he figured bloodline acquisition was still in the process of leveling up. Gustav quickly opened the system interface and went straight to check out bloodline acquisition. Abilities, bloodline acquisition. Level 5, ability to force out the bloodline of a mixed blood and pair with host if the right requirements are met. Ability to pass bloodline to another person if the right requirements are met. After focusing on it for a few seconds, Gustav realized that the information under it had been modified. Ability to pass bloodline to another person? Gustav was pleasantly surprised as he read this. This is really something, Gustav said internally with a contemplative expression. Different thoughts came into his mind as he imagined what he could create using this new ability. After a few seconds of contemplation, he decided to ask, will there be compatibility issues? Of course. Due to DNA and difference in internal structures of Earthlings, there are definitely bloodlines that aren't suitable for a person. So just like you always have compatibility issues when pairing a bloodline with yourself, if the bloodline doesn't suit the internal system of the person you wish to pass it to, there will be problems, the system clarified. I thought as much. You'll need to try this out soon, Gustav said as he stood to his feet. He checked the time and noticed that it was already around 20 minutes to noon. He tapped his left wrist area, and the dimensional bracelet he got the day before it turned visible. Another problem is deciding on the 2 checkpoints to make use of, Gustav said internally as he stared at the blue bars on the bracelet. These 5 bars indicated that it was currently full of energy. Gustav walked out of his apartment after checking and started moving towards the MBO weapons vault with his pass to get the 3 gadgets he was entitled to as a special class cadet. Gustav also remembered that according to the guidelines, the special class cadets were also entitled to bloodline strengthening, which happened to be a lab session that enhanced bloodline. This didn't increase the grade of their bloodline like the system could, but it added a plus to every bloodline. This was something every cadet was looking forward to, but at the moment, they had to wait for a month before they could undergo the experiment. By month end, if any of the special class cadets were defeated by normal cadets, they would also give up the chance to undergo bloodline strengthening, which would then be passed on to the new special class who won the battle. Later, when it was close to noon, Gustav left the weapons vault. He only picked 1 gadget due to not having enough time to look around properly. This wasn't like in the base where they were on a time limit, so he could always come back later to check properly. Gustav moved towards the main hall like many other first-year cadets. Everyone swarmed into the large hall that was arranged like a stadium on the inside. Although the first-year cadets numbered around 2,000, they hardly filled the hall after everyone arrived. A few minutes later, a lady in the same kind of uniform as Gradier Zenatus walked to the podium in the middle and began to speak. I am Commander Cilia, she voiced out. I'm sure Great Commander Cheyenne has mentioned a lot of things yesterday. They'll just fill in the blanks on some of your confusions, she added. You are going to be trained for 4 years before achieving an officer rank, but for some special ones, you might be good enough to achieve it before then. 4 years in the MBO camp doesn't mean you will never see the outside world during that time frame. Every year, you're given a test to calculate your improvement, and all of these tests are done in real-world scenarios. In other words, you'll undergo real-life missions, and based on performances, some might be good enough to achieve a rank like a certain person here, she explained lengthily. When she got to the last statement, those around Gustav turned their faces to stare at him for a few moments. Commander Cilia kept on mentioning a few more things, the dos and don'ts of the place, and elaborating on a few more things that they had heard of before. This was also where they found out that there were no second years. Those who were currently senior cadets had been training here for 2 years already and still had 2 years ahead of them. And this was due to the fact that the MBO only recruited once every 2 years. The recruits of the last 2 years were way more than that of the current year, but according to the MBO, the potential of the latter outstripped the former. While Gustav listened, he wondered just where in the world they were at the moment. The MBO camp was very massive, and from Commander Cilia's speech, the only way out of the MBO camp was through the mission hall, which was the same hall they arrived within on their first day here. According to her, the hall was off-limits to all cadets. There would be consequences if they were found loitering about the environment. It was impossible to leave the place without going through those mirrors, according to her. And all this was to increase the protection of the place because since that was the only place out, that was also the only place in. Her speech continued for the next 30 minutes before she finally dismissed the gathering. All combat cadets like Gustav had around 9 training sessions in total that were like classes they had to attend. Every day they had 3 to 4 of these sessions due to the timetable. Still, for this week, all morning training sessions had been canceled besides the morning routine. Gustav moved back to his place to continue bloodline channeling because his next training session was going to begin by 2 in the afternoon, and this training session was combat-based. Gustav wasn't the least bit worried or bothered about this session because Miss Amy had practically taught him everything related to combat. However, he couldn't miss it because he didn't want to get too conceited and slack off. He also couldn't miss it because missing training sessions were unacceptable. In another room, with a few posters with beautiful models and singers, and a flower-petaled mattress and pillow, 3 girls could be seen sitting and discussing. The one in the middle had 2 small pointy horns on her forehead with silver and pink-colored hair. The one sitting on her left was a beautiful girl with green skin and a long brownish tail, while the one on the right had white flowing hair with a slender-looking pretty figure. "Are you okay now?" Glade voiced out. Am good. My bloodline is functioning properly again. So there are no issues," Angie muttered with a wry smile as she cooped herself up and leaned her back against her bed rest. It was obvious that she was forcing herself to smile. "Look, Angie, I'm sure he didn't mean any harm by saying that. He's just being realistic," Matilda comforted Angie. "Which side are you on, Tilda? Why are you defending that jerk after seeing the way he acted?" Glade said with a tone of annoyance. "There are no sides here. I just don't want you to misunderstand him," Matilda responded. "Huh. From the moment he asked Angie to kill, I already considered him a bitch," Glade said as she raised her finger and did a thumbs down. "What? He asked her to kill?" Matilda voiced out with a surprised expression. That little SCU." Glade was about to say when Angie interrupted. "Stop it," she shouted out with a strong tone and proceeded to stand up. "I need to go now. I want to train by myself. Second chapter will be out in a few hours." Chapter 375. "Stop it," she shouted out with a strong tone and proceeded to stand up. "I need to go now. I want to train by myself," Angie voiced out as she moved forward. "Huh," both girls exclaimed from the position of the bed with a surprised expression. "Wait, warehouse." Glade was about to voice out when Angie interrupted. "I want to go alone. Please, none of you should follow me," she said while exiting through the door. Glade and Matilda stared at each other, at a loss on what to do. Angie reached outside the door and recalled this morning routine where she fell from the mountain and had to make her way back up again. She managed to make it through the second time and eventually passed the river, but she passed out on the path that led to the starting point. Fortunately for her, Falco found her and did what he could to help her regain consciousness. When she came to, Glade, Falco, and Matilda had brought her back to the starting point. At that time she looked around for a particular face but couldn't find him among them. She was happy they came for her, but not seeing Gustav among them left a sour feeling in her heart. Angie placed her hand on her chest as her body swayed, and she leaned against the wall in the hallway. "I can do this. I must become better, faster, stronger, and less merciful," she muttered underneath her breath and continued moving forward afterwards. Glade and Matilda came out of her room a moment later and followed after her. Gustav later attended the combat training session along with the other cadets. The cadets were divided into a group of 5 and trained by the 5 MBO officers in charge of combat training. They were all required to learn moves without the activation of their bloodlines at first. They were being taught the basics of hand-to-hand combat and how not to be too excessive with the movement of their body. Angie focused on combat training properly because she knew she lacked in this aspect. One of the officers took notice of her because of her flexible movement and asked her to wait after the combat training session was done. "You have to learn how to properly make use of your legs because during hand-to-hand combat, your legs are one of your most powerful weapons that can decide the fate of the battle. Your speed, movement change, and many other things are based on your legs," one of the officers said. "See this?" he said while pulling another officer towards him. Swai, shwai, shwai. The two of them immediately started going at it. The officer who was talking earlier moved his legs around in a funny way like he was dancing. To everyone's surprise, he dodged every single attack of the other officer effectively. When it was time to squat, he did it perfectly and even started pulling the officer around as they fought. Timing is also an important factor. You have to predict the moves of your opponent, he said while swerving to the left and throwing out his hand to catch the fist that was initially headed for his face. He grabbed the wrist of the other officer and spun around to use his body to hit him while pulling him forward. Swayaya. The officer spun several times in the air before landing at the front. That's it for demonstrations, he said before starting to pair the cadets against one another. Pa, 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 pa. Gustav exchanged fists with another special class. Although they were grouped separately and scattered into different sets with both normal cadets and special classes, Gustav was still grouped with another special class, coincidentally. Everyone grouped together was trying to make use of the information they had just taken into battle their opponent, so it was proving difficult to defeat the other person. Their bloodlines were not activated, but the spars were still fierce. Gustav was against a female cadet with braided brown hair. However, even though the girl was quite skilled, Gustav didn't take very long to defeat her. He could see through every one of her attacks and dodge them with ease even when their bloodlines were not activated. Gustav's right palm rubbed across her outstretched arm and pushed her arm down before sending forward his left palm towards her stomach. Bam! His palm fiercely pushed her back after making contact. Blurg. After getting hit violently, the girl spat out a mouthful of saliva as she knelt on the floor and held her stomach. One of the officers moved towards her to help. Gustav was paired with another special class cadet for a few more moments and ended the spar in about 2 minutes again. In the next 20 minutes, Gustav had ended up beating up about 4 special class cadets and 8 normal cadets without taking a single hit. The special class cadets that had witnessed his spar had to admit that his combat prowess was truly nothing to scoff at. The only person that was comparable to him so far was Elevera. Elevera was also cut above other special class in terms of combat prowess. Elevera noticed Gustav a few meters from her position and started walking towards him. However, before she reached his position, the main officer in charge of the combat session, "That's enough for today. You all have showed good potential. We will continue tomorrow." The next day, the cadets had to go through the vigorous morning routine. And just like the day before, many fell to traps and even passed out due to fatigue. Gustav made sure to complete his daily tasks after the morning routine and also channel his bloodline. Since the camp had a training facility where all kinds of equipment and scientific feats were possible, Gustav visited this place to complete his daily routine and have personal training. Today, they had a training session that had to do with the usage of their bloodline abilities to create the most destructive attacks. In the afternoon, they met at Training Facility 05, a large field constructed underground. Chapter 376. The tech installed here was capable of creating structures so outlook of things in the environment could change based on command. The officer in charge of this training session was a man with a bare head and a humanoid-looking body structure. This training session is only for the purpose of you creating the most destructive attacks using your bloodlines. I will have you all break your attack power limits before the end of this year, or I will break your heads myself. He voiced out with a loud voice. He started calling out cadets to line up in front of a round black ball that was created out of thin air. Truinin, 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 Truinin. These black balls all had the same looks, but they were arranged in front of the cadets lined up in the middle. More black balls appeared after the ones in front, and the cadets found themselves standing in front of about 12 of these balls. Each of these balls have different levels of toughness. They are arranged in an ascending order from the weakest to the toughest. Now do your best to destroy them each one at a time with your strongest attack ability, he explained. The cadets standing in front did as they were told and started by attacking the first ball with their strongest attack. Fire, electricity, bluish energy beams, and other different kinds of attacks were sent flying forward. Even though the first ball was very tough, all the cadets in front were able to obliterate it with their most powerful attack. Then they moved to the next and then the next. Just as the officer had said, each was truly tougher than the previous, and as they reached the fourth, they were unable to destroy it at once using their most powerful attacks. According to the officer, they were meant to attack a ball just once. The officer stopped them at this point and came forward. True in. The balls disappeared as he stepped forward. Now your tasks for the next 6 months would be to create a very powerful attack that would destroy the 12th ball in one go. Right now a good number of you cannot get beyond the 4th ball, he voiced out. Excuse me, Officer Cole. You can't just come to that conclusion without testing every one of us first, Elevra voiced out from the crowd with a confident expression. Officer Cole turned to stare at her as he exclaimed. The atmosphere turned tense for a few seconds as they stared at each other, but Elevra wasn't backing down and kept staring back at him. A smile appeared on his face a moment later before he responded. All right then, everyone shall be tested. However, you get to do twice the work if you fail to go beyond the 4th ball, he said while pointing at her. She shrugged without responding verbally. Officer Cole decided to pick 100 cadets at a time to try. He lined them up, and the balls once again appeared in front of each cadet. Elevra was among the 100 cadets with the black balls floating in midair opposite her. 7 of the solid black balls were arranged in front of one another a few feet from her standing point. Officer Cole gave the go-ahead for them to attack. Different kinds of attacks were being sent forward again, and those mixed bloods with close combat attacks moved forward to attack the first ball with their mightiest attacks. Among everyone, Elevra was the only person who hadn't attacked yet. Gustav stared at her from his location within the crowd of cadets waiting their turn. He had a suspicious look on his face as he felt powerful energy oozing from her standing point. Elevra closed her eyes and untied the purple head tie covering her forehead. This was the first time anyone saw her take it off, and they were astonished by what they saw. Instead of a smooth forehead or a scarred forehead like they had imagined, a long line could be seen with eyelashes. In the next moment, the line opened up, and a massive circular pitch black eye could be seen in place of her forehead. The atmosphere instantly turned weird as an oppressive aura filled the place, and a black energy started surrounding her. Officer Cole was quite surprised as he sensed the oppressive energy. VVVRRHHHHH. Boom. A pillar of pitch-black energy shot out of the demonic-looking eyeball, obliterating everything in its path. The first, second, and third balls were destroyed in an instant. The beam kept pushing through and destroyed the next ball, and then the next one after that one also. In a matter of 10 seconds, all 7 balls had been completely obliterated. The beam thinned out and stopped shooting out as the eye closed up. Elevra wrapped her forehead with the head tie again and moved away from her standing position amidst the shocked stares of every other cadet. Everyone couldn't believe what they were seeing and had even stopped theirs after witnessing that. Looks like I have to reevaluate due to special classes such as yourself, Officer Cole voiced out with a look of astonishment. He urged everyone to continue, and others also came to display their prowess, but none could compare to Elevra destroying all 7 balls with just one attack. Gustav also went when it was his turn. He attacked the balls one after the other, making use of punches. He was unable to destroy the 7th ball with one attack. Unlike the other 6, even if he managed to destroy it using his most powerful attack, it still wouldn't be like that of Elevra because he had to attack them one after the other. Some other special class cadets also did theirs, and everyone managed to destroy at least 5 balls. Eldris, EE, and Chad were able to destroy all 7 balls using their most powerful attacks. This was when Gustav realized just how powerful EES vortexes were, but whenever he made use of the attack he used, it also affected him, which was why he didn't like making use of it. Chapter 377. This was when Gustav realized just how powerful EES vortexes were, but whenever he made use of this particular attack, it also affected him, which was why he didn't like making use of it. His most powerful vortex attack was to create a vortex within something after analyzing its structure. Opening a vortex within every single ball caused the integrity and toughness of the balls to crumble. He only needed to throw a small fist attack to destroy them, including the 7th ball. But he started vomiting afterwards and passed out. Eldris and Chad, on the other hand, were quite the monsters among the special class candidates, just like Elevra. No one really understood what happened with Eldris. All they saw was the fading away of the color of the environment around him as he moved closer to the balls. The color of the balls turned from black to gray, and a single punch from him shattered them one after the other. The other special class also showcased their strength, but none besides the 4 of them were able to destroy all 7 balls. The cadets started doubting Gustav's strength because he partially transformed while attacking the 7th ball, but it wasn't obliterated in one hit. Gustav was unbothered by whatever opinions they had of him. He was testing his current level of strength, making use of these balls, so he still didn't go all out, but he was satisfied with the amount of force his mid-tier attacks carried. The training session later ended with Officer Cole stating that the special class cadets' task for increasing the power of their most powerful attack will be increased in difficulty. The normal cadets still had 12 balls they had to destroy in the next 6 months. However, the special class cadets had theirs increased to 18. They had this training session about 3 times a week, so they wouldn't be coming here the next day. However, Officer Cole mentioned that they were allowed to visit this facility anytime they were willing to train their bloodline attacks on their own. Just like that, 5 days went by, and more than a week had passed since they arrived here at training camp. The cadets were slowly starting to get used to the heinous morning routine. The cadets that used to pass out due to the fatigue on the way were now managing to make it to the starting point, although late. They found out that Officer Brian's seal didn't actually cause any bloodline to decline after 3 hours. He had only been messing with them, so they would put in their all. Even though they had only been having afternoon training sessions due to the morning routine, the cadets could feel their improvements. At this point, the most powerful first years had become extremely popular across camp than they used to. This was because the ranking board of Year 1 had been revealed. There was a place within the MBO camp that was called the ranking ground. This ranking ground had 4 rectangular screens with 100 names displayed on each of them. These were the names of the top 200 strongest cadets in Years 1 and 2. Those on the ranking board had gained more popularity among their peers, and everyone was sucking up to them. Gustav happened to be among the top 5, but the number 1 was none other than Elevra. Their training sessions were always being monitored, so the ranking board was based on the stats it had gathered so far from all the training sessions. Number 2 was Eldris, and number 3 was Chad. It was very oppressive and overwhelming to a lot of other cadets after seeing that the top 2 spots were being claimed by 2 cadets from Plankton City. Another thing was Gustav was also from Plankton City, so that meant 3 cadets from the same city dominated the top 5 spots. So far, Gustav still continued to snub and ignore many people who tried being his friend with the intent of riding on his coattails. He had met a few senior class cadets during this time who stayed in their building, but only a few because some of them were on test missions given by the MBO. Factions were already being formed in the MBO camp, and at that moment, Gustav was one of the few special classes who didn't let others fawn over him and create a faction in his name. Elevra also avoided people mostly. She was also a lone wolf, and although many cadets had tried to befriend her, she rejected them all. She had also drawn the attention of upper-class cadets. Although everyone was focusing on increasing strength and becoming a ranked MBO personnel, there were still some that hadn't left their perverted sides behind. Bullying wasn't tolerated within the MBO camp. Still, there were loopholes due to the training halls where cadets can spar with one another. On this day, Gustav happened to stumble across an upperclassman beating up a first-year cadet in the name of sparring. This upperclassman was refused by Elevra after he asked her to become his girlfriend. He arrived here to lash out and started insulting Elevra, saying all kinds of vulgar words. The first years who already idolized her were incensed, and one of them asked him to take back his words, and he replied saying, "Only if you can defeat me in a spar." Gustav shook his head in pity as he witnessed the beating. Everyone had gathered around, but in the name of sparring, they couldn't call this bullying. From Gustav's point of view, it was obvious that the senior was only trying to provoke them so he could get someone to lash out his frustration on. Gustav decided to turn around and move over to the section he wanted to train in when he noticed Elevra coming over from the other end. They both shared eye contact for a few moments before she passed by his side and arrived at the sparring position. Chapter 378. Hiya! The cadet shouted as he swung out a flaming circle towards the senior, who dodged it with ease and dashed forward before throwing a fist at the first-year cadet's guts. This wasn't the first Second or third time he was receiving a hit. Blood was already oozing down his mouth as he fell to his knees, but he quickly pushed himself upwards again. Just when he was about to dash out again, Elevra parted her way through the crowd and held his shoulder. "That's enough. Stand down," she said with a solemn tone while staring at the senior. At first, the cadet tried pulling himself from her grip, but when he heard her voice, his eyes widened, and he turned around to stare at her with a surprised expression. He realized that her grip was actually so powerful that he couldn't even move an inch forward. "You should be ashamed of not only sparring with a junior cadet, but also going this far," she voiced out while walking to his front. "I am disgusted to have such a person as a senior. If you can't even treat your juniors the right way, how are you supposed to protect others?" Elevra reprimanded mercilessly, causing the others in the surroundings to voice out their agreement. The senior cadet looked around with an expression of humiliation. You think you're a big shot because of your special class title? You are still just a lousy junior who would lose against me," he voiced out with a tone of annoyance. "I do not pride myself in destroying others' reputation, so if you do not want what transpired between this lousy junior and yourself to be revealed to the hearing of everyone, I advise you to back down now," she said with a respectful but strong and dominant tone. The senior gritted his teeth as he looked at the crowd surrounding the place. Everyone had looks of curiosity. He slowly backed down and turned around to leave. "I'll let you off the hook this time," he voiced out. Everyone in the vicinity started hailing her afterward. The cadet that was beaten nearly half to death moved forward to give his appreciation. Gustav, who was watching from up ahead, decided to finally leave. "Hold on, Gustav Crimson," she suddenly voiced out from the encirclement of the crowd. Gustav paused his footsteps and turned around slightly to stare at her. A path was created for her to walk through, and she arrived in front of Gustav in a few seconds. Both of them stared at each other for a few seconds. Gustav stared at her with a look of slight confusion mixed with nonchalance, while she stared at him with mixed expressions. "Learn to help when you see others being treated unfairly," she stated. "Huh?" he voiced out with a slightly confused look. "What are you talking about?" Gustav questioned. "You ignored your fellow cadet being unfairly beaten," she voiced out with a justice-filled tone. "Oh, is that what this is about?" Gustav said before turning around. "I tend to ignore stupidity." Since he knew he couldn't win, why agree to a spar? There was nothing wrong with him getting beaten up since he agreed to it, Gustav stated before he resumed walking away. Elevra had a slightly open mouth as she heard that and walked forward. She arrived before Gustav and placed her hand on his shoulder. "Your way of thinking is flawed. Just because you know you will be defeated doesn't mean you shouldn't fight against something you are not satisfied with or don't agree with." Gustav paused for an instant as those words sank into his mind. He recalled trying to jump from the cliff several times to end his life because of his fate that he was unable to fight against no matter how hard he tried. What's the point of fighting a hopeless battle? That's just stupid because it will only bring about more despair, Gustav said as he pulled himself from her grip and started moving forward once again. Elevra could sense the profoundness within his words. She had always sensed that there was more to Gustav than the eyes could see, and this statement made her feel even more suspicious. What if someone you cherished was involved? Wouldn't you still fight even if you knew you'd lose? She voiced out. Gustav paused his footsteps again as he heard that. The images of a few people popped up in his mind. "I don't cherish stupid people. Only stupid people make stupid challenges," Gustav responded and continued walking till he was out of sight. Chatter, 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 chatter. Why is he so cold? Are y'all surprised? That's Gustav Crimson for you. You have no idea how many criminals he killed during the final phase. He's so cold-blooded. I think he even got a little softer, letting some of those cadets follow him around. I always get the chills whenever he stares. He doesn't even give a damn about commanders in the MBO. So why would he care about the number 1 ranked even though he's number 5? The voices of the cadets in the background could be heard. Why does he sound so broken? Elevra wondered inwardly as she kept staring in the direction Gustav disappeared into. Gustav arrived in the section he wanted to train in a few seconds later and entered a private room to train. Elevra's words kept popping up in his mind even though he tried discarding them from his thoughts. I should find time to check on how she's doing, he muttered underneath his breath as the surroundings in front of him transformed into a clear, sparse forest area. He grabbed onto one of the cubes placed on the ground, and they transformed into a glowing spear. Green birds could be seen flying in the distant skies. Gustav held the spear in a throwing format as he arched his right arm back and activated God Eyes. God Eyes has been activated. His sight zoomed in on the birds flying together, and he noticed the lemon-colored one in their midst. Swayawai. He threw the spear upwards with force. Poochie. It traveled through the air with immense speed and stabbed through the bird, causing it to crumble to dust. 10 points. A scoreboard appeared on the left as the installed AI voiced out. 3 more groups of flying birds appeared on the southwest, west, and east sides of the sky. Gustav quickly picked up more of the cubes, causing them to transform into spears before throwing them upwards with speed. Chapter 379. 3 more groups of flying birds appeared on the southwest, west, and east sides of the sky. Gustav quickly picked up more of the cubes, causing them to transform into spears before throwing them upwards with speed. Poochie. Pook. Poochie. The spears flew upwards with speed and stabbed into the bird with a different color in the midst of the flying birds one after the other. The score on the projected scoreboard began to increase in number as the spears stabbed into the birds. The group of birds appearing in the sky one after the other began to move at a faster speed as time passed, and the bird with a different color in their midst became harder to spot. However, Gustav was able to easily pinpoint them using God Eyes. The next issue would be your throwing speed and accuracy. If a person was fast enough with good arm strength and accuracy, they'd still be able to hit the birds regardless of the speed of the group. And with each targeted bird shot down, speed increased, making the difficulty of the game harder. It was like a game, and a person's data and scores were recorded to check out their improvement and make comparisons every time they came to try it out. In the camp right now, this particular training was regarded as a game, and cadets used it to compete against one another. The person said to have the highest recorded score was a cadet whose bloodline gave him super arms. His score had reached as high as 3,000 on the first try when other cadets were unable to go beyond 800 to 1,000 before he lost and had to start again. Of course, this cadet being hailed as the best in this game/training had bragged about his score, unlike special class cadets who didn't mention anything whenever they came here to train. Due to this, no one really knew if his highest score right now was more than theirs or not. Gustav kept picking up the cubes with immense speed and throwing them up after they had transformed into spears. In the next 30 minutes, he was moving like a blur, and the group of birds in the sky that appeared after the last set were now a staggering amount of 230. Dash has been activated. Gustav grabbed onto 7 cubes at a time in his right and left palms before throwing them up. Truinin. 14 bluish glowing spears appeared in midair surrounding his entire figure. Due to his increase in speed, everything has slowed down in motion, including the birds in the sky and the spears surrounding him. Gustav zoomed in with God Eyes on different spots above and noted the locations of several birds with different colors from the group. Bam, bam, bam. His palms slammed into the butt of 3 spears in front, sending them flying upwards. He didn't waste a moment extra before spinning around and throwing his leg towards the butt of several spears, sending them into different directions in the sky. Bam, 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 bam. In a matter of 2 seconds, all 14 spears were hit and traveled through the air before piercing through the birds he noted earlier. Gustav had grabbed more cubes and threw more spears upwards. He turned his head towards the back with speed as he noticed the last group and the bird with a different color within their midst. Even though Gustav had been very fast, these birds were already fading away, which meant he would fail to get the unique colored bird in their midst if they faded away completely. Bam! Gustav slammed his foot on the ground, causing one of the cubes to bounce upwards. Sprint has been activated. The instant the cube started floating in the air, he activated Sprint, grabbed onto it with intense speed before throwing it upwards with force. The cubes were still in the process of transformation when they flew out of his grip. It completely transformed into a spear like the rest while flying across the air and stabbed through the differently colored bird before the group faded. Truinin. The group of birds in the air all disappeared an instant later. Beep. 12,800 points. Stage 1 complete, the AI voiced out. Gustav had a confounded look on his face as he heard that and turned to stare at the scoreboard. Initializing Stage 2. Initialization complete. Does player wish to continue to Stage 2? Advised to achieve the Gilbert rank before resuming, the AI voiced out in successions. Oh, so there were different stages. Gustav voiced out with a look of realization. What he didn't know was the senior cadets also did this type of personal training, and they set higher stages since they were already beyond Stage 1. No first cadet had gotten to this point yet, which was why Gustav hadn't heard about it yet. One would be reluctant after seeing that it was advised to be at the Gilbert rank. Still, Gustav totally overlooked that and proceeded to give the go-ahead to start Stage 2. Bam, bam, bam. In a small space with dark floors and a human-shaped board protruding out of the ground, a kid with black, curly hair repeatedly sent out attacks towards the board. Heavy kicks to the throat, chest, and gut area. His legs were already red due to hitting over and over again, but he continued. He leaped upwards and spun around before slamming another heavy kick on the head of the humanoid-looking board, causing it to vibrate repeatedly. His eyes looked fierce as he repeatedly attacked the board over and over and over again. A man in an orange-colored uniform stood a few meters away from the boy and observed him with a conflicted look. "That's enough already," he voiced out. "I'm not done," Endrick voiced out with an intense look as he kept attacking. A person's image came to his head as he repeatedly struck the boar. "Hiya," he voiced out and threw another kick. Bang. His leg pierced through the chest of the formerly sturdy humanoid-looking board. This kid. Sometimes his original strength leaks out of the seal placed on him, the officer noticed as he started moving forward. I said to. Before he could voice out completely, an opening appeared on the east side of the wall. TSSSHHHH. A man in a blue-colored business suit walked in. Endrick and the officer turned to the side to stare at who had just walked in. Huh, Sir Young. What brings you here? The officer voiced out with a respectful tone. There will be no chapters for the next 2 to 3 days. Privileged chapters will also be unavailable for purchase due to reset. I'm resetting it to make the tiers more affordable and also adding in more chapters, so only the chapters that I have stockpiled will be released to fill in the new privileged tiers. However, they will be unavailable for purchase because I'm not going to be writing any more chapters for 2 to 3 days as I mentioned earlier. Thank you all for understanding. Chapter 380. Huh, Sir Young. What brings you here? The officer voiced out with a respectful tone. Give me some time alone with the kid, Young Joe said with an authoritative tone. My apologies, Sir Young, but I can't do that. Endrick is under strict supervision and is not to share a conversation with anyone during his isolation punishment except for the officers that were assigned to him, the officer explained lengthily. I'm going to need to ask you to leave now, the officer added. Young Joe ignored his rants and kept walking forward till he arrived in front of the officer. Young Joe was at least a head taller than the officer. He stared down at him and lowered his head before whispering some words into his left ear. The officer's eyes widened slightly after hearing the words Young Joe whispered into his ears. His mouth opened slightly as he spoke. You have 5 minutes with him, sire. Please make it quick. Although he was trying to hide it, his voice was slightly shaky. He started moving forward and left through the door-like opening on the west of the enclosed space. Endrick, who had witnessed what had just gone down, stared at Young Joe with a slightly suspicious look. What did you say to him? Endrick questioned while narrowing his eyes in a slit. Who are you? Young Joe ignored these questions and moved forward till he arrived before Endrick. Those questions are unimportant. Who I am doesn't matter, he said with a smile. I have a question for you. How badly do you wish to defeat your big brother? Young Joe added with a sketchy smirk planted on his face. Endrick's forehead creased as he stared at Young Joe. How is that any business of yours? Young Joe was a little startled by Endrick's response, but he wasted no time in giving a reply. I wish to help you. I am a friend who wishes to see you win in every situation. I want to support you, Young Joe stated while stretching out his right hand. Endrick stared at his outstretched hand, then looked back up to stare at him before turning around to ignore his hand. I don't need your help. I can defeat Gustav on my own, Indrik stated with a prideful look with a hint of annoyance. He's just a... Indrik's hands trembled as he squeezed his fingers into a fist. Are you sure about that? Young Joe cut him off from behind. Sure about what? Indrik asked. You're supposed to only spend 2 months in isolation, but that's only based on if they see improvement in your behavior. What if they don't and keep you here longer than 2 months? Young Joe stated. Indrik's eyes widened as he heard that. If this happens, how will you ever get the chance to defeat your brother? Remember, your fate lies in their hands, and you're powerless to make the decisions you wish to make, Young Joe said as he moved forward. Also, your brother now has a personnel rank in the MBO and will be undertaking missions soon, so if you don't get to the MBO base soon, you might never be able to challenge him. Are you sure you won't risk this by waiting around? I really thought your goal was to defeat your brother and show the world that you're better. I guess I was wrong. Young Joe stopped speaking after saying this and turned around to leave. Wait, are you saying you can do something to change that? Indrik turned around to ask. Young Joe paused his footsteps and turned around. I can make you leave here in exactly 2 months' time, regardless of your behavior and conduct. If you wish, I can also shorten your isolation sentence by a month, Young Joe proposed. You can do that? Indrik said with a surprised tone as he realized this man was not as simple as he thought. Yes, I can. Afterwards, we can make plans together on how you can effectively deal with your brother. If you agree to my conditions, you will receive my help. This is going to be a mutual gain kind of collaboration. We will both benefit from this, Young Joe explained. And how exactly will you benefit from this? Indrik asked. You just have to work with me and undergo any mission I give you for the next 2 years after you complete your training in the MBO. If you agree to this, I will also help you climb through the ranks of the MBO faster and become superior to your peers, Young Joe stated. 2 years? What AR? Before Indrik could complete his sentence, the officer that left earlier came back in through the opening towards the west area. Time's up, Sir Young. Please, you have to leave now, the officer voiced out as he walked towards them. All right, Young Joe replied as he turned around. We'll talk some other time, Indrik. Think about it and give me an answer when next we meet, Young Joe voiced out as he left through the opening. Indrik stood in place for several moments with a look of contemplation. What did you two discuss about? The officer asked with a look of curiosity. None of your business, old man, Indrik voiced out disrespectfully before moving towards the side to sit. He was already worn out from today's training, so he wanted to rest for a while and also think about Young Joe's proposal. He had been here for about 2 weeks now, so if he decided to agree with Young Joe's proposal, he could get out of here in the next 2 weeks and join the others at camp. 2 years. And I have to complete any mission he gives me, Indrik wondered inwardly. After my 4 years training, when that time comes, I will be powerful enough to cancel out our deal if I want to. After all, power can turn around any fate. He must be stupid if he thinks he can make use of me however he likes. Instead, I'll be the one using him to get out of isolation, Indrik thought as a smirk appeared on his face. Chapter 381. Time's up, Sir Young. You have to leave now, the officer voiced out as he walked towards them. All right, Young Joe replied as he turned around. We'll talk some other time, Indrik. Think about it and give me an answer when next we meet, Young Joe voiced out as he left through the opening. Indrik stood in place for several moments with a look of contemplation. What did you two discuss about? The officer asked with a look of curiosity. None of your business, old man, Indrik voiced out disrespectfully before moving towards the side to sit. He was already worn out from today's training, so he wanted to rest for a while and also think about Young Joe's proposal. He had been here for about 2 weeks now, so if he decided to agree with Young Joe's proposal, he could get out of here in the next 2 weeks and join the others at camp. 2 years. And I have to complete any mission he gives me, Indrik wondered inwardly. After my 4 years training, when that time comes, I will be powerful enough to cancel out our deal if I want to. After all, power can change any fate. Getting out of isolation as soon as possible is the most important thing right now, Indrik thought. As Young Joe traveled within the transport vehicle that brought him over to the MBO tower, he smiled. The kid didn't jump at my offer like I expected, But that doesn't matter. He won't say no now, young Joe muttered as he grabbed onto the cup placed in front of him to take a sip of the contents within. Get the nanites ready, he said before tapping onto the button, sticking to the back of his right ear. Angie was busy training personally with one of the officers in charge of combat training. She was currently sparring with an officer called Cora. Officer Cora was a buff 2 meters tall man with green and black hair, along with a 13 inches ponytail. Stop pulling your punches, he voiced out as he flicked her forehead, causing her to slide backwards by 7 feet. Ow! Angie held her head with a look of pain. But I'm not. I'm attacking with full force, Angie replied. Just how much of a nice person are you? You're pulling your punches subconsciously because deep down the feeling of not wanting to hurt others is etched in your mind, he stated. Angie was taken aback by his analysis and raised her right hand slightly to stare at it. You don't belong here, he voiced out next. For what purpose did you decide to join the MBO? He asked. I want to attain the strength to protect others from danger and suffering, Angie said with a look of determination while clenching her fist and staring down. Do you know there are certain things you have to let go of if you ever want to achieve that? He said while walking towards her. I do, but there are also some things that I cannot let go of. I can't let myself become a mindless and emotionless murderer, or there would be no point in doing this, Angie voiced out. I only want to kill when there is no other option. I want to be strong and enough to make the decision when it's necessary so other innocent lives will not be endangered. Please teach me. Angie's eyes watered as she spoke. Officer Cora stared at her for a few seconds before responding. You remind me of someone. Let's see if you will surpass him or end up just like him. Now I know just how to train you, he said while turning around. How often do you use your legs to attack? He suddenly asked. I don't really make use of them, Angie responded with a confused look. You do know that the legs pack a punch more than the arms do, and that's even more for a speed star such as yourself, he stated. Yeah, I do, but... Angie had a conflicted look on her face as she paused her speech. You're afraid of causing too much damage, so you refrain from using kicks, he said with a look of realization. We need to get rid of that mentality first. I will teach you how to inflict maximum damage using those legs of yours, he said while pointing at her thigh area. Another day went by, just like it was a Wednesday. Cadets had been looking forward to this day because they would be starting a new training course that everyone seemed interested in. Due to the 1 week of the canceled morning routine, they were unable to take this course last week. This training session was called Intergalactic Warfare. This was training with actual spaceships. The training camp had a space shuttle. However, it was unauthorized for liftoff, so the spaceships parked there were only there for show. According to what they heard, although their training would be held there, they would be making use of simulations to practice. After the morning routine, when everyone got their bloodlines unsealed, they quickly moved towards the location of the training camp space shuttle. Gustav moved amidst the many others towards the space shuttle. They arrived in front of a massive octagon structure fenced by thick walls on the south, west, and east. There was also a runway and a massive circular hole in the front. The cadets were let in, and they arrived at a part of the internal structure that led underground. Zoom. They were all slowly brought down by the floor of the structure, which suddenly started descending. They arrived in a broad underground hangar where 2 massive spacecraft could be seen in front. This underground hangar was immensely large, and the walls were dark with whitish lines. However, it was brightly lit due to the lighting installed. As the cadets walked forward with awe-stricken looks as they stared at the 2 massive spacecraft with sizes similar to 3-story buildings. Many of them had seen a spacecraft before, but not this close-up. For those who lived in Plankton City or the neighboring cities around. Chapter 382. Many of them had never seen a spacecraft before, but not this close up. Those who lived in Plankton City or the neighboring cities around had the privilege of even entering into one. However, that was an old spacecraft, and it was way different from the current looks of spacecraft. These spacecraft were black and azure in color. They were shaped like a pentagon cut in half. The emblem of the MBO could be seen plastered on the top exquisitely and boldly. This was the first thing that would be noticed the instant a person laid eyes on it. Everyone stopped walking forward as they noticed someone standing up ahead in the middle of both spacecraft. It was a 4 feet tall looking female who looked like a 13-year-old. However, she was clad in an MBO uniform, which made it obvious that she wasn't. The cadets had surprised looks on their faces after recognizing the color of the uniform, which meant she was of higher rank than other officers within the MBO camp. What are you brats doing standing around? Get over here right now. She voiced out with a mature feminine voice. The cadets were a little taken aback by the sudden exclamation. The last to get here will be kicked out of my class today, she added with a strong tone. Everyone quickly moved forward after hearing that and arrived in front of her. She stared at them with a repressed expression, sizing up cadets one after the other. Everyone kept wondering who this young-looking female officer was and why she was acting so strange. She walked forward and observed a few of them, and then moved in a circular motion around them. Many of you don't belong in this training session. Intergalactic warfare isn't for every officer, so I'm sure the numbers will eventually reduce. Some of you will never be deployed outside the planet to fight battles, she voiced out and turned around to move forward. You will refer to me as Officer Mag, she voiced out as she kept walking forward. Follow me, she added. The cadets did as they were told and followed her forward. They passed in between the 2 spacecraft parked on both sides of the underground hangar. There was another passageway in front that was looking like a tunnel. The passageway lit up with circular lights planted on the walls of the tunnel-like path. Everyone went through it one after the other and arrived in a large dark space. This place was so large that even with the number of the cadets being over 1,000, it was able to contain them with ease, and even more spaces were left. The cadets had looks of confusion on their faces as they walked in, but lights started appearing all over the place in the next second as the space started to transform. Truion, Xian, seats with straps, a control aircraft-like steering in front, and a massive holographic imagery of space could be seen. The internal structure of the space was transforming into that of a spacecraft. There was more than one control steering wheel with so many buttons that one would have a headache from just staring at them. Just like a military aircraft, there was a space behind that was similar to a walkway where seats were placed against the walls of the spacecraft. These seats each had a helmet and straps, numbering in the hundreds. Look around you. This is the internal structure of an MBO battle spaceship, she voiced out. Now some of you who might have a knack for this and will end up as future spacecraft pilots, while some will end up as vice pilots. However, besides this, there are also other roles involved within piloting a spacecraft. Regardless of whether you're bright enough to become a pilot or not, every officer sent on an intergalactic mission would have a role, she explained. There are those we call the spotters. They locate any anomaly within the routes leading to their destination in space. There's the stinklers. They look for possible escape routes out of anomalies like space radiation showers, high and low-level black holes, space rupturing, collapsing of stars. There are times that spacecraft are caught up in things like this. And finally, the majority of officers in an intergalactic warfare squad are the combatants. Their only job is to get ready to battle at any time while traveling through space. Since they'll be well-equipped and trained, they are expected to be ready to battle within any and every occurrence. There are also the backup pilots who sit among the normal officers just in case something happens to the main pilots. They're always there to take control of the spacecraft command, Officer Mag explained lengthily. She explained that although advanced AIs were installed within every spacecraft and were supposed to do the work of some of these roles on a spacecraft, it was impossible for an AI, no matter advanced, to be better than the combination of an AI and a mixed blood. The spotters and stinklers are granted mechanical helmets that help them perform their tasks effectively. These mechanical helmets apparently sync the brainwaves of the mixed bloods with that of the AIs. This, in turn, increases the efficiency of performing their roles by a lot. A lot of you must think being a space combatant is probably going to be the easiest among every other role in a spacecraft, but you're wrong. A lot of you will still fail trying to be one because none of them are easy, and this is why officers that travel through space are the ones being paid the most. Officer Mag hit the nail on the head with this. A lot of them felt being a combatant would be the best option after looking around and seeing the buttons and control functions that were unknown to them. Anyways, enough with the pep talk. Your current assignment is to memorize the function of every single button within this spacecraft within the span of 2 weeks. She voiced out next. Chapter 383. Almost everyone's eyes widened slightly as they heard that. They looked around and noticed over 700 buttons, and that some switches were built differently. They wondered how they were supposed to learn the functions of every button within 2 weeks. I hope you all have your recording devices turned on. I will state the functions of every button, so make sure you pay attention, she said as she moved towards the first control platform. Gustav's ears perked up as he raised his concentration to the max and moved forward as well. The training ended later after 2 hours, and many cadets left grumbling with dissatisfied expressions on their faces. They couldn't understand why Officer Mag was so harsh. Someone got slapped after doing something out of turn. Out of all the officers that had trained them so far, she was the only one that treated them this way. The others were either neutral or nice, like Officer Bryant. Gustav wasn't bothered like the others since he memorized the 700-plus buttons and their functions. His intelligence had risen to the point where he had a photographic memory. In fact, it was even better. The moment something was mentioned, he couldn't forget about it even if he tried to. If he did, he could easily recall it. However, Gustav wasn't going to let anyone know about this. Neither was he going to reveal that he knew the function of every single button and gear when it was time because his aim wasn't to become an MBO pilot. He could do with being a combatant in the future, but he didn't want the pilot role because of specific reasons. He moved on to combat training before he was done for the day. Gustav had been visiting the MBO camp library for the last week to increase his knowledge of many things. He once again headed there by evening time to read more on intergalactic travels. The MBO camp had 4 different libraries, and Gustav's goal was to read every single book within. However, this would be impossible in the meantime because first-year cadets were not allowed to visit some of the libraries unless they had successfully become second years. And second-year cadets were practically third years because 2 years equaled a single semester. What Gustav didn't know was that his current rank gave him access to everywhere within the MBO. He didn't know what being ranked personnel entailed. Gustav was currently reading within one of the libraries. He found out that cadets that had just completed their 4 years of training were put on some kind of probation first. Even those that completed their training with excellence were given internal missions first before the higher-ups decide whether or not they were qualified to go on intergalactic missions. These internal missions, of course, were missions on the Earth. There was a probability that an officer who had just completed their training with excellence might never actually be given a mission outside the planet. This decision was up to the higher-ups. This threw Gustav off course a bit as he wondered if such a fate might fall on him. It would be disastrous if he finished his probation missions on Earth and wasn't enlisted among the squads that dealt with intergalactic missions. Gustav's main goal was outside this planet. If he decided not to use the MBO to achieve his goal, it would be harder for him, so it would be a problem if such a thing happened. Gustav started formulating plans just in case things went sideways. Gustav, in the process of thinking and not paying attention to his surroundings, he didn't notice that someone had closed in on him from the east side. Gustav turned to the side to stare at who had called out his name. "Vera, what do you want?" Gustav said with a slightly wary expression after noticing the person. It was the same Vera who jumped on him the last time he had a date with Angie, the granddaughter of Mr. Gone. "Hi, Gustav. I didn't come to cause any trouble, I promise. I just want to have a little chat with you," she muttered with a shy expression as she arrived in front of him. What is with her? Why is she acting differently this time? Gustav wondered. I should stay away from her. I can't read her at all, Gustav said internally as he stood to his feet. Not interested, Gustav said as he picked up the book in his hand and moved towards one of the shelves. Wait, Gustav, really? I need to talk to you about something important, she voiced out with a tone of urgency. Gustav hurried even more upon hearing that. He wasn't interested in witnessing her do something crazy to him again. Vera tried going after him, but in a few seconds, Gustav was out of sight. I lost him. How will I get it out of him now? She muttered to herself. Gustav had arrived on the path that led to his room area in the next few seconds. He was currently sprinting towards his room. "Hey, we have a problem," the system suddenly voiced out as Gustav arrived in front of his room building. Gustav paused his footsteps and slid forward by a few feet due to friction. "What do you mean by that?" Gustav responded internally. He was startled by the system's statement since this was the first time the system was ever mentioning that they had a problem. There's something inside you," the system stated. "Essa? What do you mean by that? How can there be something inside me without your knowledge?" Gustav replied with a confused expression. "That's because it has hidden itself pretty well so far. Now I understand," the system said. Gustav turned silent and waited for its explanation. "Remember your date with Angie? When you two were returning, I mentioned that something integrated with your body?" The system asked. "Yeah, I do. Is that what this is? I actually thought you were messing around." Chapter 384. "Yeah, I do. Is that what this is? I actually thought you were messing around," Gustav said with a look of realization. "Why would I mess around like that? Anyways, I scanned your entire internal structure and found nothing on that day, but I remain cautious about it. When you were in close proximity with that Vera girl a while ago, your body reacted," the system said with a disturbed tone. "She's responsible for whatever is inhabiting my body right now?" Gustav said with a tone of annoyance. "Yes. She planted a pseudo-parasite within you when she kissed your neck," the system explained. "How is that even possible? And you didn't notice?" Gustav asked with a look of confusion. "That's because it's different. I never expected we would meet someone like this here." The system's tone sounded more and more mysterious as it spoke, piquing Gustav's curiosity. "Meet someone like that? What are you talking about?" Gustav questioned. "That pseudo-parasite is one that could turn a living being into a puppet the moment it matures inside the body of the living organism it inhabits. Of course, there are some beings with abilities similar to that, but only one type of being exists that can deploy such parasitic strain into the internal anatomy of another living being without any form of detectability, no matter how powerful that living being is. They are the most dangerous and feared even across galaxies due to this. The host would be taken over without ever suspecting a thing. Neither would the people around them even be able to suspect, because the parasitic strain would be able to mimic the host's character, attitude, goals, and practically everything that makes them themselves, causing no suspicion. The only difference would be that the host would start exhibiting loyalty to the person who planted the parasitic strain within them," the system explained lengthily. "What the?" Gustav exclaimed with a look of wariness as he heard the explanation. "Gustav, that girl is not an Earthling. She's a xenophobia. I'm guessing that's a term for an alien, right?" Gustav responded. "That's an alien race that is many galaxies away from here. What makes this even more puzzling is the fact that their planet is under a universal seal that was put in place by many powerful planets collaborating with one another due to the sense of danger they felt towards the xenophobias. Earth happens to be among one of those planets that assisted in the sealing. The xenophobias are unable to leave their planet to other planets due to this powerful seal. So how did that child get here? And from the looks of things, she seemed to have grown up here," the system stated with a tone of suspicion and curiosity. "Vera is an alien? And one that's not even supposed to be outside of her planet? This doesn't make any sense," Gustav said with a contemplative expression. He couldn't wrap his head around this due to the thousands of theories that started to formulate in his head. "Can you get rid of the parasitic strain she planted in me?" Gustav asked. "I can, but although it's still in its infancy stage, because I didn't sense it earlier on, you'll take serious damage if I get rid of it myself. The best way would be for her to get rid of it herself, which should be relatively easy and safe," the system explained. Gustav sighed with a look of relief. He was glad the system was able to get rid of it regardless of whether it would cause damage or not. However, he was even more glad that Vera was not a villain. At least not yet. He had decided he would give her the chance to do the right thing, and if she failed to, she would suffer the consequences of her actions by his hands. Sprint has been activated. Gustav turned around and dashed forward with speed back in the direction he came from. He arrived back in the library a few seconds later and started looking around for Vera. To his disappointment, She was nowhere to be found anymore. He checked around the place twice, ignoring the rules of not using abilities within the library, but still didn't find her. Gustav moved out of the library and started dashing from place to place, but even after an hour went by, he still couldn't find her. He was thinking about visiting the female dormitory areas, but he didn't even know where to start from. Even if he did check there, without consent from one of the girls, no male was allowed entry into any of the female buildings. Looks like he'll have to hold off this search for later, Gustav decided, and turned around to leave when he noticed a green spiky-haired youngster up ahead. Gustav. The youngster recognized Gustav immediately, and Gustav also recognized him. Mr. Gon's grandson and Vera's cousin. What was your name again? Gustav asked as they approached each other. It's Damon. I'm a huge fan of you. Before Damon could complete his sentence, Gustav interrupted. I need to find Vera. Do you know where she is? Gustav asked with a tone of urgency. Yeah. No, but I have her contact information right here so you can connect to her, Damon said while bringing out a triangular device from his storage device. Cadets were still allowed to use their devices since they couldn't communicate with anyone outside the camp. Whatever barrier was set up prevented calls from going beyond camp. Gustav quickly collected the information he needed and dashed off into the distance without exchanging another word with Damon. Damon scratched his hair with a slightly embarrassed look. That wasn't how I imagined our second meeting would go, he muttered underneath his breath before turning around to keep heading towards his initial destination. Gustav arrived back in front of the library, where he met Vera and made a call. The moment Vera heard his voice on the other end of the phone and his desire to meet up with her, she started being on her way. Chapter 385. Gustav could hear her delighted voice from the other end of the call. He quickly ended the call with a slightly disturbed look on his face. The cadets moving around would occasionally glance in his direction as they moved about, wondering why someone who doesn't often show himself would be out here. In a few more minutes, Vera arrived with a bright smile on her face as she approached Gustav. Gustav activated his combination. Sprint plus dash function. He dashed forward with speed and grabbed onto Vera, dragging her along with him as they disappeared into the distance together. Gustav arrived in front of a secluded area within the camp that was like a garden where trees and flowers were planted all across the place. Bam! He slammed Vera onto one of the trees while grabbing hold of her neck and pinning her back against it tightly. What did you do to me? Gustav's eyes squinted dangerously as he asked. Even though he was squeezing tightly against her neck, Vera smiled with a look of delight as she grabbed onto Gustav's arm and pressed it against her neck even more. What are you doing? Are you crazy? Gustav voiced out as he pulled his arm back. She's gone psychotic again, he said internally as he stared at her. Why did you stop? Getting killed by the one I love would be the most perfect thing in the universe. Vera coughed lightly as she spoke with a look of delight and fell to her knees. Love? What are you talking about? I will torture and find a way to end you if you don't come clean right now, Gustav said with a disgusted look as he looked down at her. Oh, please do. I love you, Gustav Crimson. I'll be willing to do anything to experience that from you. She voiced out and looked up to stare at him lovingly. This girl is most definitely crazy. I can't communicate with her like I did to the others. Gustav came to this realization as he noted the expression on her face. Gustav squatted and stared at Vera in the eyes. Hey, you say you love me, right? Gustav asked while raising one eyebrow. Yes, she nodded twice while replying. Don't you know that trying to turn me into your puppet means betraying that love you feel? Because right now I despise you so much, and I'm slowly growing to hate you for what you did, Gustav stated bluntly. Vera's eyes suddenly turned sad as she heard that. She stared at Gustav with a look of pain. You hate me? She muttered. Yes, I totally despise you right now. You have proven to be weak by trying to take the easy way out, Gustav replied. But I didn't mean to. I. Gustav interrupted her before she could finish. The only way for you to redeem yourself is by getting rid of what you put in me, Gustav stated. Does that mean you'll love me if I get rid of it? She asked with a hope-filled gaze. No, Gustav cut her off instantly, causing her eyes to turn red. But he'll despise you less if you get rid of it and tell me exactly what you are, Gustav added. This is better than him hating me. I didn't mean for it to happen. I was going to get rid of it anyway, she said internally as she stood up with a conflicted expression written all over her face. She moved closer to Gustav, who was a little startled by her approach. What are you doing? He questioned. Don't move, she said while leaning forward. Her face traveled towards Gustav's right neck side. A low, sloppy, squishy sound was heard from Gustav's neck area as her lips made contact with his neck. Gustav's body trembled slightly as he felt a jolt of electric-like current run through his body the instant Vera sucked on his neck. He almost subconsciously moaned out, but he was able to regain control of his senses before he exclaimed in a manner that would leave him embarrassed. A glowing blue mark appeared on the area Vera was sucking, and in the next instant, it disappeared. She withdrew her lips and smiled. You're free now, she voiced out. Hey, system. Am I clean? Gustav still decided to ask the system to be sure. Yes. I can no longer sense any strand of the parasitic strain. Your body would be reacting to it due to the close proximity between you two if it was still within your internals. The system confirmed the authenticity of Vera's statement, causing Gustav to lower his guard a little. So tell me, what are you? Gustav asked. What do you mean? You want to know how my bloodline works? She asked with a slightly confused expression. Cut the act. You don't have a bloodline because you're not a mixed blood. Xenophilbian, Gustav said with a strong tone. Bwahahaha. Vera suddenly started laughing. She turned around and held the tree for support as she laughed for several seconds. Gustav stood in place with an unbothered expression on his face. He kept staring at her without saying a word. After laughing for a few more seconds, she noticed Gustav's straight face and realized he wasn't messing around. I don't know what you're talking about. What's a xenophilbian? She asked. Still playing dumb with me? All right, then he'll keep despising you, Gustav said, and proceeded to turn around to start walking. Vera's eyes widened as she quickly called out to him. Wait, please don't go, she voiced out as she ran to Gustav's front and blocked his path. Are you going to spill now? Gustav asked. But I really don't know what you're talking about. What's a xenophilbian? I'm truly just a mixed blood like you, she said with a sincerely confused expression. What's up with this? Does she not know what she is? Gustav wondered internally as he noted her sincere tone. It would appear that way. She doesn't seem to have heard that term before, the system added. Then, do you know that you're not of Earth? Gustav voiced out while staring into Vera's eyes. Chapter 386. Then, do you know that you're not of Earth? Gustav voiced out while staring into Vera's eyes. What do you mean by not of Earth? Vera voiced out with an even more confused expression on her face. Did you hit your head, darling? Vera asked with a worried look. I mean, you do know that you don't have Earth origins? Your kind originated from another planet, Gustav elaborated. However, Vera kept staring at him with a confused expression. She really doesn't know anything? Gustav was once again dumbfounded. It would seem that she is completely unaware of her true origins. She doesn't seem to even have a clue. The system responded with this. Vera, is Mr. Gon truly your grandfather? Are you a true descendant of his household? Gustav decided to ask. Of course, Grandpa Gon is my father's father. Vera confirmed instantly. Then what exactly is your ability? Gustav questioned. Vera explained that she was able to control plants and insects around her by secreting a kind of gas from her body. She demonstrated this, and a green gas oozed out of her being, spreading across the surroundings. The tree behind turned a little darker in color, and Vera proceeded to swing out her left arm. Swihayai. A long tree branch swung forward and slammed to the ground in front, causing dust to scatter across the place. Vera was able to control the tree to move as she willed like it was an extension of her body. She did the same thing with the grasses and the insects around. She made a swarm of insects fly around Gustav, forming a love sign in midair, while also making the grasses on the ground grow taller, wrapping around his feet. After the demonstration, Gustav asked, Then what of the ability you used on me? The parasite, Gustav asked. That. Grandfather and father warned me never to use it and never to reveal it also, Vera said with a cautious tone. Have you used it on someone else besides me? Gustav asked. I only used it when I was still a kid. My former classmates and teachers ended up becoming my puppets. I also enslaved a councilman by mistake, because there are times when I can't control it, just like when I kissed you back then, Vera explained. Gustav now had a basic understanding of how things were. It would seem her family is hiding the truth even from her. There must be a hidden secret in Mr. Gon's household. She turned a councilman into a puppet. Gustav couldn't deny that this ability was very dangerous, and if it ends up in the hands of a villain, the earth could be turned upside down. This was already proof that Mr. Gon wasn't a bad guy, since he had told Vera to never make use of it, even though he could have used Vera to his advantage, being his granddaughter. Hold still, Vera. I want to try something, Gustav said as he raised his right hand. Sharp claws grew out of his fingers, and he grabbed on Vera's neck. Puick. His claws dug shallowly into her skin, causing her to exclaim in pain. Gustav waited for a few seconds before pulling his arm back. Vera's neck started bleeding, but she kept staring at Gustav like she wasn't experiencing any pain. Gustav quickly brought out a healing pill and fed it to her. She truly isn't a mixed blood, Gustav said internally. He had tried using bloodline acquisition a while ago, but it didn't work. Mr. Gon, just what are you hiding? Gustav wondered. So, is Vera less detestable now? Vera asked with shimmering eyes. H&M, you've been good so far, Vera. Gustav nodded lightly as he responded. Vera's eyes glittered with happiness as she heard that. Just don't act like that again. We'll have to remain in touch, Gustav added. H&M, yes, Vera is at Gustav's beck and call any time, Vera answered with a beautiful smile. The day went by just like that. It was a Sunday, which was the only day they had a single training session. It was around 8 in the morning, and Gustav was currently free due to having a single training session. He had been thinking a lot about Vera's abilities and had come to an understanding that even her ability to control the plants and insects around her was just a branch of her Xenophilbian abilities, only that it was weaker. The system confirmed that Xenophilbians did have different ways in which they used their abilities, but it mostly focused on controlling living organisms. If groomed properly, she can become a great and powerful asset to the MBO, but since the MBO has no idea about the true extent of her abilities, she will become a great asset to me instead. I will have Vera become a special class cadet, Gustav decided. As Gustav came to this decision, he remembered something. That kid still isn't here. I wonder how much longer his punishment will last. Gustav stood up after muttering that statement and moved over to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. Calm, calm, calm. While Gustav was in the kitchen making breakfast, he heard knocks on his door. He shook his head thrice as a wry smile appeared on his face. He already knew who was at the door before arriving there. SSHHHSSS. The door slid open after Gustav gave the permission. Falco and Eldris strutted into the living room. Ha, I can smell it already. Gustav, what's for breakfast? He voiced out with a starving look as he stared in the direction of the kitchen. Some male mixed-breed fried ball sack, Gustav responded. What? You messing with me, right? Asked with a choking look. Who knows? Gustav responded while shrugging his shoulders. Ha ha ha. Falco started laughing after hearing that. Good morning, Gustav, Eldris greeted after laughing lightly. Eldris was still as tall as ever. He was still close to reaching 7 feet and still growing. His graceful and charming looks with his silver-colored hair that was so long that it swayed around his buttocks area. Chapter 387. His two closed eyes added an air of mystery to his being. This was someone who didn't need charm points to be charming. Gustav nodded at the both of them before proceeded to head back to the kitchen. If a male mixed-breed ballsack smells that good, then count me in, he voiced out as he proceeded to sit in the dining area. Falco and Eldris had their mouths open for a few seconds as they turned to face Okay, that came out wrong. He laughed lightly as he added, You really would eat anything, wouldn't you? Falco started with a burst of light laughter. In a few more minutes, Gustav came out of the kitchen and served them with some of the dishes he had prepared. The four of them piped down and enjoyed the hot and delicious meal. Gustav's place had been their go-to place every weekend in the last 2 weeks. When Eldris tasted one of Gustav's dishes the last time he visited with E and Falco, he couldn't help but admit that Gustav was an extremely talented cook. Since then, he had been longing to visit once again with Falco and this peasant. I have to admit you best me in this aspect. Falco's alter ego suddenly took over and voiced out after munching a mouthful of juicy meat. You idiot, get back in, Falco said as he slapped himself before gaining control back. Sorry about that, hee. Falco laughed lightly after gaining control back. It's cool, Gustav responded before grabbing a bowl-sized fried batwing and munching on it. Your alter ego is quite a handful, isn't he? Eldris said with a slightly worried look. Don't worry, I have him under control. Falco smiled while responding. You do not, you Lee. Pa. Falco slapped himself again before his alter ego could complete the sentence. By the way, Eldris, I've never seen you open your eyes. Voiced out with a look of curiosity as he stared at Eldris sitting on the opposite side of the dining. I heard your eyes are related to your bloodline. Falco added. That is quite true. Although I can activate my bloodline without having to open my eyes, opening them enhances my abilities and has an effect on the surrounding environment. I mostly do not open them unless necessary, so as not to affect those around me, Eldris explained. Gustav, and Falco had looks of understanding on their faces as they heard this. Then how do you see? Falco asked. I can envision my surroundings within a radius of 60 feet because my senses are enhanced, Eldris answered before he continued eating. He has quite the perception, Gustav said internally after listening to that explanation. He could also walk around without opening his eyes, and this was all due to perception. The only downside was being unable to tell the color of things around you. Must suck to not be able to see colors. Said the exact same thing on Gustav's mind. No, I can actually sense colors even if I can't see them. Colors speak to me, Eldris responded with a smile before pointing at the table. White. He called out the color of the table. Brown sofas. He pointed at the living room area next. The comb in your hair is green in color, Eldris said while pointing at How did he know there was a comb in my hair? And the color when it's hidden? Had a surprised look on his face as he wondered. Good thing he didn't mention the other thing. Eldris went on to point to different other objects, calling out their colors to the astonishment of them all. That's quite crazy. We should have invited the girls over, said with an astonished look. Gustav heard that and remembered something. I said I was going to check on her. Sigh. By the way, man, what's up with you and Angie? Finally decided to ask since this had been on his mind for a long time. Nothing. We're just minding each other's business and training to become stronger, Gustav replied before sipping some water. He had a look of suspiciousness on his face while Falco's face turned slightly dark after hearing this. Why? Falco voiced out as his forehead creased. Huh? Gustav exclaimed. Why did you ask her to kill? Falco asked with a dark look. He had a confused expression on his face after hearing that. He stared at both of them, repeatedly waiting for an explanation. It's not a request. It's a challenge. And it's for her own sake as well as those she will get affiliated with in the future, Gustav shrugged as he voiced out casually. Still, it's wrong to manipulate her feelings like that, Falco said with a disappointed look. What are you two talking about? What kill? Who's asking who to kill? Voiced out with a confounded expression. Gustav told Angie to kill. Unless hell never accept her feelings, Falco revealed. Wait. What? EE's mouth was left open as voiced out. He turned to stare at Gustav, who had just finished the meal in front of him and was casually cleaning his mouth before taking a sip of water. I'll be back. I need to check on something important, Gustav said as he stood up and walked towards the door. Wait, man, we need to talk about this, voiced out, but Gustav ignored him and kept moving till he was out of the apartment. The three of them sat there with conflicted expressions on their faces as they waited. Knowing Gustav, there must have been a good reason why he would decide to do that, thought. What really happened? Tell me everything, said to Falco. Eldris was all ears, too, because he wanted to understand what was happening so he could assist in any way possible. This is what Glade told me. Falco started narrating. Gustav arrived outside in a few seconds and started dashing towards the direction of the female residence. Chapter 388. Swoosh. He arrived in front of the path that led there in a few minutes and found a place to sit. He looked around for a few seconds, but he couldn't see anyone that he recognized, even though the girls moving around recognized him. Some of them wondered why he would come here, but there was no rule stating that a male couldn't sit in front of the path leading to the female's residence. God Eyes has been activated. Gustav activated God Eyes, causing his irises to glow green and scarlet. Life sign tracking activated. Gustav closed his eyes as different symbols appeared in his mind. He focused on a particular one, caret plus caret. He suddenly opened his eyes as his sight transformed into another place entirely. Bam, bam, bam. In his line of sight, he could see himself jumping in the air and kicking a massive 12 feet tall rock 7 times before landing on the ground. This was because it wasn't himself that he was seeing. Instead, he was seeing through another person's forehead. The wall blasted apart, and an officer could be seen standing in front. He clapped his hands with a look of encouragement. Then he gestured towards the person Gustav was seeing through. Tall trees could be seen around this place, and a path where yellow-colored water flowed through on the side. There was a ledge in front where the water was flowing down from. The officer seemed to be leading this person towards the ledge. Gustav smiled and closed his eyes. God Eyes has been deactivated. He stood up and began walking back towards his room. She's working hard, he said internally. Gustav arrived back in his apartment a few minutes later. To his surprise, Ildris and Falco were still there waiting for him. Gustav walked towards one of his sofas and sat. Master Gustav, would you like a can of soda? The humanoid bot in his apartment voiced out as it approached him. Nah, I'm okay, Gustav responded as he leaned his back against the sofa. If you have something to say, say it. Your stares are beginning to prick my skin, Gustav stated. He could already tell that Falco had narrated everything to the both of them. The three of them walked towards the living room area and also took their seats. Look, man, I understand why you did that, but it feels like an overkill. She would eventually learn after undergoing 1 or 2 missions in the future. Started speaking first. You can't just ask someone who dislikes violence to kill. It's wrong even though. She has feelings for you, Falco added. Gustav turned to stare at Ildris. Your turn, he voiced out and waited for Ildris to speak. I'm with you on this one, Ildris voiced out. You did the right thing. The only problem is, I feel you went about it the wrong way, Ildris added. Falco turned to stare at Ildris with a look of confusion. How is it right to tell her to kill? He voiced out. Being here means you have accepted to becoming a murderer whether you're currently one or not. A person who is not interested in causing another person's death should not be here because when it comes down to it, we'll have to kill to protect those that really matter in the future, Ildris stated. Falco turned to stare at the front with a complicated expression. Just one thing, man. It would be better you watch over her, so she doesn't lose herself when that happens, suggested. That's true. From what I have heard about her, someone like her is likely to turn mad after doing something that goes against her morals. Except she changes those morals, you will have to watch over her, Ildris added. No, this is her journey. She has to do this on her own. As we are now, she's neither a friend nor a foe, an accomplice nor an opposition. Things will remain like this until she successfully completes the challenges, Gustav voiced out before standing up. The three of them stared at Gustav's face, which looked completely serious, just like it used to. They figured he wasn't messing around, and from what they understood about his cold attitude, they could tell that changing his mind would be near to impossible. Why does he give off such a strong, commanding vibe? Gustav will really turn out to be something great within the MBO in the future. But he also has to learn to be a little softer at times, Ildris said internally. Later during the night, Gustav sat in his personal training room channeling his bloodline. Today's events replayed in his mind as he started making plans for the future. Earlier during the day, the three of them had failed to convince Gustav to watch over Angie. The truth was, even if they didn't mention it, he still would. However, he didn't want them to know that he would be doing this because he wanted Angie to remain with the impression that he had completely discarded her, and wouldn't have anything to do with her until she completed the task. After a few hours, Gustav opened his eyes and smiled. Step 2, he said while standing up. He had just achieved a minor breakthrough, reaching Step 2 of the serial rank. It had only been 2 weeks since they arrived here, and Gustav could feel himself improving at a fast rate. He couldn't imagine how fast he would develop in the next 2 years of being here. Gustav decided to head towards one of the training centers to gauge his improvement. Within a dark space, Indrik sat down cross-legged and breathed in and out softly. SSHHHSSSHHH. An opening appeared on the west side of the wall, and a man in a business suit walked through it. Have you considered my offer? He asked while approaching Indrik. Can you get me out of here in 2 weeks' time? Indrik asked while opening his eyes. Chapter 389. Yes, young Joe responded. So long as you agree to my offer, he added. All right then, I agree, Indrik responded without hesitation. Young Joe smiled as he arrived in front of Indrik. Good, now swallow this, young Joe said while squatting and stretching out a yellow pill towards Indrik. What's that? Indrik asked with a wary expression. It's a stimulant that activates itself after 4 years. You won't be able to say no to my missions while it's activated. Also, it disappears completely from your body system after 2 years of activation, which is also when our collaboration will end, young Joe explained. Do you think I was born yesterday? Indrik voiced out before slapping the pill away from young Joe's hand. I won't be so stupid as to believe the words of a total stranger. For all I know, that could be a death drug or something that would turn me into a mindless fool upon consumption, Indrik stated. You can cancel the collaboration for all I care. Am not consuming no pill, Indrik voiced out. Ha ha ha, you see, this is why I like you. I was just testing you to see how you would react. I must say, I'm impressed. You are truly not a fool, young Joe stated with a praising look. Indrik raised one eyebrow up suspiciously before calming down. But then, how can I be sure that you will stick to your end of the bargain after I help you out? Young Joe asked. Why don't we sign a contract? That way you'll have proof of my agreement, Indrik proposed. A contract is a good idea. I will have something tied to it, so if any of us goes against our word, that person will lose something, young Joe stated before pulling out a device. Both of them later signed a contract with terms and conditions involving the loss of a huge sum of money if any of them failed to carry out their side of the bargain. The amount of money involved in this would be one that even a mayor of a city or a business tycoon would be afraid of losing. Young Joe started leaving after they were done. Indrik smiled and stared at the front after he had left. Fool, I will destroy that contract with my own hands when I become powerful enough. He laughed lightly while speaking. Young Joe arrived outside the MBO tower, where a ride was waiting for him. He got in and smiled while staring at the contract within the device he was holding. Erase data. This is unnecessary, he commanded. The contract data was immediately erased. Young Joe's smirk increased even more as he recalled the last time he was here. Young Joe picked up a strand of Indrik's hair from the floor before he left the last time. Indrik had no idea that such a thing happened because his back was faced towards young Joe during their conversation. While he was inside the aircraft that brought him back to his residence the other day, he had asked for them to prepare a particular set of nanites. These nanites could do exactly what he mentioned to Indrik. The moment these nanites entered into Indrik's bloodstream, he would be unable to refuse any of young Joe's missions. This was truly what was within the pill he gave Indrik to consume. However, young Joe already knew Indrik would refuse to take the pill, which was why he made precautions by taking a strand of his hair. These nanites were designed from scratch again with the DNA from Indrik's hair used as a catalyst. The moment Indrik made contact with the pill by slapping it away, these nanites made their way out of the container into his body. Young Joe was unaffected while touching it earlier because they would only react to Indrik due to his DNA that had been used as a catalyst for creation. It should be settling in his bloodstream by now. Gustav Crimson, now I have your brother in my control. You're going to be next. Young Joe smiled as the ride took off. Back in the enclosed space, Indrik was about to get up when he felt something. Grab. He quickly grabbed his left arm and pressed it tightly. What is that? It's moving? Indrik said with a tone of disbelief. That bastard. How did he? Indrik voiced out with a tone of annoyance. He turned his face around to the side and noticed the yellow pill on the floor several meters away. Don't tell me. Hiuff. Indrik suddenly groaned in pain as his left arm started bloating below where he was applying pressure. I need my ABI lighty to stop this. Indrik groaned in pain as he tightened his right hand around his left arm even more. He wanted to make use of his bloodline ability to uproot and destroy whatever invaded his body. However, he was still weakened due to being in here. Help! Indrik shouted out repeatedly, but there was no answer. He was slowly losing grip on his left arm. After a few more minutes of holding out, Indrik's grip slipped due to lack of energy, and he fell to the floor as the nanites infiltrated his insides. "No!" He shouted out with a look of anguish and pain. Gustav suddenly woke up in the middle of the night and looked around. What was that? He muttered with a confused expression. He placed his hand on his chest. Badump, 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 badump. Why did my heart rate suddenly increase? Gustav wondered as his heart rate slowly went back to normal. He stood up and moved to the kitchen before taking a sip of water and going back to bed. Today is going to be hectic. I should sleep a little more, Gustav decided after checking the time and noticing that it was still past 2 a.m. Just like that, another week passed. On this day, the cadets were all feeling the tension in the air due to the intergalactic training session. Today, they would have to mention the functions of the 700+ buttons within the main control room. Chapter 390. Today, they would have to list the functions of the 700+ buttons within the main control room of the spacecraft. According to Officer Mag, those who couldn't list the functions of at least 500 out of the 700 had no business being in the intergalactic training session. With this, they could tell that some cadets would be marked as potential failures of this training session today. Even though they would still be allowed to partake in the intergalactic training session till the year was over, they were probably going to be among those that would end up being dropped and unable to continue with it by the time the next year began. After their daily routine, the cadets moved towards the camp space station. Officer Mag was already waiting for their arrival just like always, and her appearance had not changed from the childish and grumpy look. Get over here, she voiced out before turning around to walk towards the simulation room. The cadets followed after her entering the simulation room through the passageway that led there. During their 2 weeks of training with her, she had taught them a lot of protocols that also involved being within a spacecraft. According to her, spacecraft was just a higher form of aircraft, which meant that if they could learn this, they would be able to fly any transportation vehicle that works in the air. Another thing was the proper wear of their flight uniforms. The instant the cadets got into the simulated spacecraft, they approached the changing rooms to pick up their flight uniforms. Their uniforms were circular-shaped. The moment they placed it on their chest, their entire body would be covered in a black and red jumpsuit-like armor along with a helmet. Take a seat, everyone, Officer Mag instructed after they had all geared up. Everyone proceeded to have their seat in the hallway-like area where seats were arranged in a straight line, facing each other with backs placed against the wall. Truion. Holographic projections appeared in everyone's line of sight. The holographic projections buttons and switches within the spacecraft's main control center would appear, and they would have to input the use of such a button. This was within their helmets, so the person sitting beside you would be unable to see how you answered the question. Gustav stared at them as they appeared one after the other in different shapes, sizes, and colors at times. He didn't spend more than a second on each one giving the answer immediately they appeared. Jumper 1 ignition, leap accelerator, swerve fluctuation, bumper 3, bumper 9, turbo weapon activation, glitch mode. The instant he sighted a panel of them, he would recognize the name of every single button on that panel and list their uses. Some cadets had looks of seriousness and tension on their faces as they did their best to recall the usage of these buttons one after the other. Only a few cadets seemed to be breezing through this due to the look of easiness on their faces. Gustav counted as he answered these questions one after the other. The moment he reached 500, he started giving the wrong answer to the rest of the questions. Seconds turned to minutes as time passed. Just when it was 20 minutes into the task, Gustav submitted the answer to the last question and stood to his feet. The cadets were surprised at his speed in finishing up. Most of them hadn't even answered up to 500, Yet Gustav was already done. They had no idea that he could have finished up earlier if he wanted to. Officer Mag stared at him with a slightly suspicious look as he walked towards the main control room of the simulated spacecraft to wait. This kid, isn't he the one known as Gustav? I will see what he's capable of today, she said internally. Minutes later, other cadets were also finishing up one after the other. Some normal cadets who were said to have high intelligence even finished before a lot of special class cadets. This was their turn to show what they were capable of since this test-like exercise practically dealt with intelligence. However, everyone still wondered how Gustav was so fast and felt that he just might be an all-rounder because everyone had noticed that Gustav managed to stand out in every training session. He was always coming second place in the morning routines. In combat classes, he was always winning spars. Some of them had even witnessed his prowess in some personal training sessions. Special class cadets were the cream of the crop among all cadets, but some of them still had courses where they weren't very excellent, and while some of them had the ones where they specifically excelled and better than others or on the same level with the best. However, Gustav was always proving to be good in every training session, which made them wonder if he was an all-rounder. This had brought a lot of envy and jealousy among fellow cadets, and Gustav had become one of the most debated cadets in training camp within these last 3 weeks. Everyone was eager to see their scores, but they were even more eager to see what he would get due to being the first to submit. About an hour later, time was up, and everyone had to stop the exercise regardless of whether they were done or not. Officer Mag instructed the AIs to display the score of the cadets from the best to the worst. Wow, the number 1 was Gulvich with a total of 723 out of 803. As expected, it's another special class cadet. The number 2 isn't a special class though. Yes. The number 2 is this Vulcan dude that is said to be extremely smart. He was only off by a mark. The cadets voiced out amongst themselves as they stared at the projection of their scores. At least half of the cadets got below the 500 cutoff marks, while the rest managed to get that amount. Sorry for the lack of chapters these past few days. I ended up taking a longer break than expected. Chapters update will go back to normal from tomorrow. Chapter 391. Elevra, Ildris, Chad, EE and Falco had managed to be among the top 20. The top 70 spots were dominated by special class cadets mostly, but there were still a few smart, normal cadets that managed to outdo them. Angie, Glade, and Matilda were amongst the top 50s who managed to get around 600 points. Those who managed to get up to 500 points rejoiced. This way, they knew they had finally stepped onto the path of intergalactic travel and had higher chances of being among the officers who get sent out of Earth for missions. Hey, what is Gustav's score? I thought he would be among the top 5 at least, someone whispered from behind, not wanting to be spotted, but his voice was loud enough for others to hear. This prompted others to look up and check. Not only could they not find Gustav among the top 10, but he also couldn't be found among the top 100. There, check number 498. Oh, I see it. 501 points? That was way lower than I expected. Chatter. They had expected a higher score since he finished first, but now a lot of them realized that Gustav might have just been picking any answer. I guess he's not truly an all-rounder like we thought. This exclamation was on a lot of their minds. Gustav ignored the voices of these gossiping and busybody cadets in the background. He had achieved his goal of meeting up with the 500 points, and that was all that mattered to him. Angie, Glade, EE, and the others stared in Gustav's direction with a surprised look. They knew Gustav well enough to understand that there was no way his score would be this low when the rest of them managed to reach 600. Knowing Gustav, they figured he was probably up to something again, but they couldn't read him, and since he was so tight-lipped, they figured he probably wouldn't tell them what he was up to either. You scums did just as I expected. Those of you below my cutoff mark can kiss your future in intergalactic travels goodbye. The intergalactic squad won't be needing idiots like you. You are better off staying on Earth, Officer Mag voiced out without a single shred of mercy in the tone of her voice. Those of you who wish to redeem yourself in the future can continue coming for this training, but the next one is going to be 2 times harder than this. So think twice about whether or not you want to remain here, she added. You have 10 seconds to decide. If you don't leave within 10 seconds, I will assume you have resigned yourself to fate and the torturous training that comes after. A devilish-looking grin appeared on her cute small face as she got to this point. 9. The atmosphere suddenly became tense when she started the countdown. The cadets with lower scores had looks of uneasiness and conflict on their faces. 8, 7, 6, 5. At this point, about 100 of the cadets gathered here were zooming out of the simulation room. These were mostly cadets with scores around 100 and 200. They didn't have the confidence to continue, especially after remembering Officer Mag's statement about how the next was even going to be tougher than this. 3, 2, 1, 0. At this point, only around 800 cadets were remaining out of the close to 2,000 cadets. The simulation room was currently even more spacious now. Ah, a breath of fresh air. It doesn't stink as it used to, Officer Mag voiced out with a delighted look before raising her head to stare at the rest. Good. I see that you lots have balls. The suffering will begin from the next training session. She laughed lightly. Officer Mag went on to mention a few more things and how they'd be going into lessons on battling within a spacecraft before dismissing the bunch. As the cadets left, Officer Mag stared at them leave with a suspicious look. Reveal Gustav's answer projection, she muttered underneath her breath as she moved towards a secluded part of the simulated spacecraft. Truian. A small square-shaped projection appeared in her front, showing Gustav's answers to every question. She scrolled down across the projected screen quickly. As the answers were showed along with a green bar that stated whether they were correct or not, Officer Mag noticed that every answer from 1 to 300 that she checked so far was correct. Her left eyebrow raised slightly as she got to the 501st answer. From 501, Gustav started to get the questions wrong till the last one. The last one was the only correct answer from number 501. Something is up with that kid. Could he have failed them on purpose? She wondered out loud. Arrived back in his room in a few minutes and started channeling his bloodline once again. He channeled his bloodline for the next 2 hours before stopping to take a break. I still wonder how I wasn't interrogated by the higher-ups about how my bloodline increased in grade. Maybe Miss Amy has something to do with it, Gustav wondered as he took a sip of the tea he had just prepared. He realized that after this week, it would clock a month that they had arrived in training camp. Next week was also when the special class cadets would be given access to visit the labs for bloodline strengthening. Oh, I will have to pick 3 from the challenge letters by next week. Gustav recalled that he would have to fight with 3 people out of all the normal cadets that had requested to battle with him for the position of a special class. Gustav was a little surprised that out of all the special class cadets to challenge, some cadets actually picked him, but then he recalled that some of the youngsters after Matilda's hand might have used this as an opportunity to battle him. I will post the after rectifying the issue of repeated chapter. Chapter 392. Gustav could tell that next week was going to be pretty interesting. For now, he just wanted to focus on training and finding more information about space. I wonder if Miss Amy has figured anything by now, Gustav thought. Gustav shook off the thought because he understood that she would have found a way to send a message if she could. Gustav was curious at one time, so he tried reaching the end of MBO camp, but just as the commander of the camp had said, there was truly no way to leave. There was no way to even get to the end or beginning of camp because Gustav found out that he was just running in circles when he got to a certain point. Whatever the MBO used in isolating this place from the rest of the world was top-notch. Their passes had points that they could use in purchasing foodstuffs from different places in camp and also materials used for different things. Aside from the gadgets that were given for free, it was also possible to buy more gadgets, weapons, or any useful tech using these points. The only issue was, points were given every month based on evaluation of monthly performance, so every new cadet only had very few points, so they couldn't purchase high-cost items. However, there was a catch. Cadets could make use of real-world currency within this place to buy things if they were out of points. The downside was every item would be twice as expensive as its usual value. Some cadets already had flying boards, body shields, and expensive techs that they purchased using real-world currency. However, only very rich kids in the real world could manage to afford this using real currency. Gustav wasn't really against this, but it was literally like cheating. Assume these rich kids purchased powerful and expensive tech. In that case, they could use this to challenge those that were unable to afford such and defeat them using this method, even though they were weaker. Special class cadets that were poorer would be targeted by these rich kids who were normal cadets. These rich cadets that weren't strong enough would abuse this to become special class cadets. The only reason Gustav could think of that would make the MBO implement this was the fact that they were trying to make this a bit more similar to how situations would be in the outside world. In the outside world, no one would care about whether you were more talented or stronger. The opponents would use whatever means at their discretion to defeat you. So, this would be a kind of challenge for a lot of people. Gustav could tell that a lot of idiots would assume him to be very poor and also challenge. He wasn't really bothered since he would only have to face 3 people. After taking a break for a while, Gustav decided to head towards the library once again. He was still researching space. There was a particular book he was reading that was titled Intergalactic Travel Theories. He had read 10 volumes of it already, and according to the librarian, there were around 15 volumes. During this time frame, Gustav already learned quite a bit about space as well as things to be wary of while journeying. Gustav arrived at the library in a few minutes and started checking floating books and devices lined up in rows and columns for volume 11. A particular book caught his attention due to the first word he saw on its cover page. Galaxy's Treaties. Gustav muttered with an intrigued look and reached out to grab it. It was massive in size, at least twice the length of an adult's head. It had a blue and black thick cover page. Gustav took this book back to one of the seating areas and flipped it open. This book happened to contain information on the planet's Earth had signed peace treaties with other galaxies. Not only did it have that, but it also gave information on the planets and what resources they provided Earth with. Marldork Prime, Orion Galaxy, millions of light years away. A foggy purple dust-filled atmospheric type of planet. This planet Earth has purple grain which increases the speed of agriculture by 7 times. Edorkian Vingilis, Marlian Galaxy, atmosphere unconducive for humans and Slarkovs. However, mixed bloods are a different case. Provides Earth with advanced mechanical plans for faster intergalactic travel. Gustav read these pieces of information one after the other. There was also information about how to journey to these planets, as well as how their ecosystem works and the species that inhabited the planets. During his 1 hour of reading, Gustav noticed that throughout, he hadn't seen any place where the information of what Earth gave these planets back in return was written. Why does it seem more like a conquer than a treaty? Gustav wondered as he remembered the rock. He fought with the rock, which actually happened to be an alien back in the underground ruins who explained to him that Earth had been conquering planets. This was why Gustav didn't discard the fact that all these could just be a cover-up, so Earth wouldn't look bad in the book. Because it didn't make any sense for only the other planets to give something to Earth without receiving anything back in return if it was a true treaty. Of course, there was also the thought of whether they just decided not to include what Earth gave back in return. All in all, Gustav couldn't discard his suspicions. Isn't this the same planet Matilda's plans to visit? Gustav muttered as he stared at the imagery of a large purplish and vague greenish planet along with the information written underneath. A Brookie's planet, Orion Galaxy. It shouldn't be here. Wait, why is there a red mark besides it? Gustav mumbled with a suspicious look as he stared at the red X on the side of where the name was placed. Gustav had a look of realization as he remembered the princess from the footage. Chapter 393. This must mean they used to have a peace treaty signed with Earth before, but now it is no longer valid. Gustav's face shone with a look of contemplation as he got to this point. He recalled the princess mentioning that they asked for help from Earth severally, but they were met with different excuses of why Earth couldn't send troops to help them. But why would they decide to turn a blind eye and end the treaty? This made Gustav feel like there was something more to this than meets the eye. Gustav decided not to overthink it because he obviously couldn't figure it out by himself. He had decided he would ask one of the officers here about this later. He continued digesting information about everything. They'll have to meet with Matilda later, he thought. Hours later, Gustav left the library after reading through the information on the galaxy's treaties and 2 more volumes of the book he was reading earlier. Officer Mag had recommended some books from the library for them to get, and digest the information within. This book, of course, had to do with the inner workings of a spacecraft. She had told them she'd be asking them about it in a week's time. Gustav decided to take these recommended books back to his room. Just like that, another 2 days went by. On this particular afternoon, they were being trained within the spacecraft simulation room on combat during space travel. Everyone was dressed in their spacesuits as the spacecraft piloted through the endless space. Boom. Whoosh. A hole was suddenly blasted through the left side of the spacecraft, revealing the endless dark space. The wind was sucking everyone towards the hole with intensity as the gravity of the surroundings instantly changed. Wah! Pyrar! A few cadets screamed as they were sucked through the hole in nearly a second, finding themselves displaced in space. Tap, tap, tap. Gustav and many other cadets had already tapped the button on the left side of their suits, which happened to be an anti-gravitational field activation button. Instead of being sucked away like the unlucky ones, they were able to get off their chair and walk across the small hallway-like area where they were strapped in. Gustav felt his body becoming immensely heavier as he moved forward with caution. Zoom, zoom. Several humanoid-looking bots could be seen moving with speed towards the spacecraft from the whole blasted outside space. They infiltrated the spacecraft in no time, and a battle ensued. Boom, bam, bam, thhrhhhyyyyy. Different blasting sounds rang out as they battled. The cadets engaged these humanoid AIs. Gustav refrained from jumping across the place at this time due to the gravitational issue. His suit expanded as his body increased in size. Sweehai! He swept his arm across the place, blasting a humanoid AI backwards and sending it slamming into several others. The other cadets also showed their prowess as they battled the AIs properly, pushing them back. However, no matter how many AIs were destroyed, the place was still being flooded due to their massive numbers. Gustav slid forward as his body descended with his back almost touching the ground before he did a 360-degree speed, sweeping 3 AIs off their feet at the same time. Falco's alter ego had taken over at this point. He dashed forward with immense speed and swiped his right finger forward, causing a dark moon-shaped energy beam to slice forward. SHHRHHH. The 3 AIs were smoothly cleaved into 2 as Gustav kept running forward. Get me towards the opening over there, Gustav voiced out as he punched a hole through the chest of another AI. The number of AIs swarming his line of sight numbered in 200. On it, he shouted out from behind as he conjured a purplish vortex and threw it forward. Swan. Gustav grabbed onto 3 AIs at the same time and smashed them together before dashing into the vortex. He appeared a few feet away from the massive opening on the wall of the spacecraft. God Eyes has been activated. Gustav scrutinized and calculated the size of the hole on the wall of the spacecraft in a few milliseconds. Although I can't breathe in space, I have to do this. Gustav held his breath after breathing in before taking off his helmet. His head was already transforming into that of the serpentine mixed breed as horns protruded out his head. A purplish beam gathered in front of his mouth before shooting it towards the 3 AIs he smashed together earlier. Bam, bam, bam. He joined their bodies together and merged them using the heat of the beam he was shooting out. He blasted more AIs apart in the vicinity and joined their bodies to the ones he already had. The other AIs in the vicinity had crowded him and were about to attack him while he was busy with that, but they couldn't understand why their body had turned extremely sluggish. This was due to the fact that Gustav had activated gravitational manipulation, which was currently affecting his surroundings. However, the AIs were only delayed by this for a few seconds. They were already about to attack him while he was merging the bodies of the destroyed AIs together. Sryriak. Falco and EE appeared by his side out of a vortex EE had just created. Bang, bang. They attacked the AIs in the surroundings, protecting Gustav. Gustav lifted up the merged bodies of the AIs a few minutes later, and they had been flattened into a kind of wall. Gustav dashed towards the opening on the wall while carrying the merged bodies of the AIs and slammed it into the opening. Bong! The wall he created with the bodies merged perfectly into the hole, covering it completely. Bam! Gustav grew in size, becoming up to 12 feet tall as he pushed his left palm against the wall to block the AIs behind from pushing through. Zoom! He shot out the purplish beam from his mouth again, using it to trace the lines at the edges, smothering them together. In a few seconds, he was done, and the hole was blocked. Gustav turned around and joined the rest of the cadets to battle against the AIs that were currently within the spacecraft. The issue of double chapters has been resolved. Chapter 394. Gustav turned around and joined the rest of the cadets to battle against the AIs that were currently within the spacecraft. Bam, bam, bam. Attacks were sent flying everywhere, and in 10 minutes, all the AIs had been completely dealt with. Die-in. A loud alarm rang out as the simulation room returned back to its normal state. The gravity turned normal once again, and they were no longer in space. SSHHHSSHHH. A door on the right slid open, and Officer Mag walked in with the other cadets that were sent flying out of the hole on the wall earlier. The cadets that were formerly sent flying had looks of shame as they walked in. What did I instruct you to do the moment a part of the ship gets blasted apart and a suction force starts pulling you towards the hole? She voiced out with a loud tone, causing those behind to shiver subconsciously. Tap on the anti-gravitational field button. They answered in unison behind her. And where is it located? She asked with an annoyed tone. On our left breast pocket area, they answered again. How come 20 of you failed to do that? You had at least 637 seconds to tap, yet you all failed to do something so simple. She voiced out. Silence, they didn't know how to answer that. Useless. Bunch of useless. She reprimanded harshly. But Instructor Mag, it's not our fault. We only had less than 2 seconds. Why are you being so mean? A youngster courageously voiced out from behind. Gasp. Some cadets subconsciously gasped after hearing that. Did you just talk back to me? Officer Mag questioned while turning around to look up at the 6-foot brown-haired kid. He couldn't find the words as he noticed her scary round eyes. Officer Mag arrived in front of him and pointed out her finger to poke his abdomen area. She was so quick that even the youngster didn't feel her finger until after she had withdrawn it. Bang! He didn't even get to react before he fell flat on his face, feeling extreme heaviness on his body. The others warily moved away from his side and stared at him with a look of pity. He struggled to move his neck as he raised his head to stare at Officer Mag. Officer Mag squatted. Now this is a much better height for a convo. What did you say about me being mean? Ha 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 ha. All right then, remain like this till the end of the session, she said before standing straight. The youngster was unable to speak due to the heaviness. Now you lots also deserve punishment. I have the perfect one. ×2 gravitational pull as you continue today's session, she voiced out. The others had looks of fright on their faces, but before they knew what was happening, swayawai, swoosh, she had dashed across the place, touching them one after the other very quickly. The moment her touch connected with their bodies, they felt the weight of their body double. Next time you lots will remember to do what is required. She smiled sheepishly before turning around to face the cadets that had just finished battling the AIS. The rest of you in Group B did a nice job, she praised as she walked forward. There were currently 80 cadets lined up in front, Gustav, Falco, and EE included. Officer Mag had grouped them into 8 groups earlier before giving them this assignment. Gustav, Falco, and EE just happened to be in the same group, so they had decided to work together to ace this from the start. After all, they were the only special class cadets in this group. Good work sealing the hole, Gustav. That was quick thinking. EE and Falco, good assist also, she praised. EE and Falco gave each other a fist bump while Gustav nodded. The rest of you were only concerned with the number of bots you destroyed. You should know that the enemies you encounter in space could keep increasing in number and end up overwhelming your entire crew, she reprimanded. After sealing their entry point, your next step should be to check on the pilot and deploy the supportive battle drones on the ship to assist in clearing the main control room. If the pilot is out of commission along with the assistant vice pilot, the emergency pilots should take over the steering of the ship and move the ship to safety. The enemies always attack the pilots first to keep the ship stalled in place till their troops take over the spacecraft. Officer Mag explained lengthily. The cadets took note of this. Instructor Mag, a question, Gustav suddenly voiced out from up ahead. Go on, she permitted him to ask. Since a part of the ship was blasted open for the purpose of infiltration, what stops them from blasting more places open to ensure successful ambush? Gustav asked. Good question. Officer Mag said before proceeding to explain. There are only a few spots on a spacecraft that can be blasted open without causing severe complications to the ship. If the enemy's purpose is to hijack or infiltrate the ship, they would only aim for these spots. Truinin. About 4 different locations in a spacecraft appeared in a projection form in mid-air. However, if their purpose is to destroy your ship, they wouldn't mind trying to blast holes in other places. She stated. The cadets also took notice of these spots she showed them. One more thing you should understand is, it's not so easy to blast these spots open no matter how powerful the enemy is, because every MBO spacecraft has a very high level of defense across the galaxy. If they eventually do manage to blast a hole through one of these spots, they won't be able to do it the second time because they would have spent an immense amount of energy trying. She paused for a brief moment as she got to this point before resuming her explanation. Chapter 395. So once the hole is blocked, you have practically ruined their chances, although whatever you must have used in repairing the hole has to also be sturdy, which is the part where you failed Gustav. I give you a pass for the effort and improvisation, but the body parts of the AI being merged together will be way easier to blast aside. Although you might just have enough time to save the spacecraft before that happens, she voiced out. Are there other ways of infiltrating the spacecraft besides blasting a hole through one of the walls? Falco asked. Of course they are. We'll be going into that in the next class. Your time is up, Officer Mag said with a solemn tone. Now every one of you, get out and tell Group C to get in here, she said with a bossy tone before proceeding to sit. Gustav and the others moved out of the simulation room and arrived on the outside where many other cadets could be seen waiting their turn. Damn, they were amazing. Did you see how Gustav performed? He literally has multiple abilities. S-EE and Falco are also pretty strong. The special class are always in the spotlight. Some cadets voiced out from the background as Gustav and his group walked out. There was a projection hovering in mid-air that displayed the simulation room. Gustav could tell that the cadets waiting here must have been watching their performance. The next group started moving towards the simulation room after being informed of Office Mag's instruction. Gustav passed by the side of a green-haired, handsome-looking youngster who was also heading in with the rest. As they passed by each other's side, it was as if time slowed down as the green-haired kid's eyes moved to the side to stare at Gustav. I hope you're ready for next week. A smile appeared on his face as he voiced this out while passing Gustav's side. Gustav paid him no heed, almost like he didn't even hear his words, and walked past him. However, the green-haired kid kept smiling, knowing that his words were heard as he disappeared into the simulation room along with the others. He seems to have gotten quite stronger, Gustav said internally as he kept walking forward. Not like it matters. Better don't get too cocky. I can sense something off with that kid, the system suddenly warned from within. For you to suddenly say this, then I have to be careful, Gustav responded internally. Good. You had better stop underestimating people like that, the system reprimanded. Sure. Stop nagging like a mom already, Gustav said with a slightly annoyed tone internally. As a mom, I would be way better than the one you used to have. Gustav. The system response got Gustav speechless again. I'll just make sure to end the fight as quickly as I can, Gustav decided as he headed back to his room. Just like that, another 3 days went by again and it was weekend. Today would make it 1 week that the cadets had arrived in camp. Gustav felt like time was flowing a lot faster than he expected, since he could still recall the day they arrived here like it was yesterday. He noted his improvement to be the fastest he had ever improved in a single month, even when he used to be weaker. Tomorrow would be the day where points would be given out based on evaluation of the month. Tomorrow was also the day when the special class cadets would have to accept the challenges of 3 normal cadets out of all the challenge requests they had gotten. Gustav had a box full of requests for challenges delivered to him on this day and was currently browsing through them. Apparently 69 normal cadets had requested for Gustav to accept their challenges. He had expected them to be a lot in number, but he didn't expect this many. Looks like being labeled as top 5 strongest cadets didn't scare anyone away. Gustav muttered with a look of pity. He looked into the information of these cadets, one after the other with curiosity. Gustav noticed that the ones he had checked out so far were mostly rich kids, and they had one similarity. They attended Matilda's celebration party. Calm, calm, calm. While checking through, Gustav heard knocks on his door. SHHHSSHH. He gave the command for the door to open, which it did. Falco and Eldris walked in. Each of them had the same type of white box in Gustav's hand. They greeted Gustav and moved to the sofa area to also go and check on his box. Wow, this many people challenged you. Such guts. Voiced out the instant he spotted the requests in Gustav's box. Apparently some of them are using this opportunity to test out my current strength due to the issue at Matilda's party, Gustav replied. Oh yeah, I totally forgot about that. Those lame rich kids. A responded with a snicker. Falco how's? What the F asterisk CK? Shouted out as he turned to stare at Falco's box. There were over 100 request letters stacked within. How come these many people decided to pick you? Voiced out with a look of disbelief. A wry smile appeared on Falco's face as he saw their reactions. They must have labeled Falco as one of the weakest special class. These must be the ones who have no idea about the capabilities of the other you. Eldris analyzed with a look of contemplation. Such disrespect. He'll murder those bastards. Falco's alter ego suddenly voiced out, causing Falco to cover his mouth quickly. No killing, Falco said with a soft voice after regaining control. Mine are only around 20, said while pouring out the contents in his box. SEES were lesser than Gustav and Falco's. Eldris, what of yours? Falco asked. Just these 3. Eldris scratched his temples as he picked up the 3 challenge request letters from his box. As expected of a top 5. Falco fawned. Dude, Gustav's also a top 5, he reminded. Chapter 396. As expected of a top 5. Falco fawned. Dude, Gustav's also a top 5, he reminded. Oh, true. A wry smile appeared on Falco's face as he realized. It makes sense that ID have this many challengers. More than half of them is from that time, Gustav said while checking the names on the challenge letter one after the other. Falco and also started sorting through theirs for who to pick while Eldris sat still and held a book in his hands. One would wonder how he was reading the contents of the book without opening his eyes. After a few more minutes, Gustav finished sorting out his challenge requests along with I have no idea who the others are besides the ones who are after Matilda's hand, Gustav muttered. They are probably rich kids with exquisite gadgetry who intend to make use of those texts to win the challenge, responded with a look of contemplation. Also, there are quite a number of people who are after you. You have a hate fanbase apparently because a lot of cadets dislike your attitude. I heard someone say he was gonna defeat you and make you lick his feet because you act so high and mighty, Falco stated. Started laughing after hearing that. Really played out quite funny in my head to see Gustav licking boot. But yeah, you gotta be careful with these niggas, man. Some of them are really out to get you. But it's you, so I'm sure things will be fine, added with a tone of seriousness and a smile. Oh, let them come. It's been a while since I felt my hands smacking on faces and fist-breaking jaws and bones. I need the exercise. A smirk appeared on Gustav's face as he responded. And Falco subconsciously shivered as they heard that. They recalled scenes of Gustav battling with others and realized that it was always bloody. Elevera seems to be quite interested in you, Eldris suddenly voiced out. Why do you say that? Gustav questioned with a confounded look. She asked about you some time back. It's the first time I've seen her get interested in knowing someone's background since we were kids. But I refrained from disclosing any information about you because it is not my story to tell. She must have missed the broadcast from Mastergon's media station, Eldris stated. Hold up, you've known Elevera since you were kids? Asked with a look of disbelief. She's my little cousin, Eldris revealed. What? Both and Falco voiced out at the same time. She's your cousin? Even Gustav was a bit surprised by this revelation. They had never seen both of them acting like they were related. Both of them not sharing a similar resemblance was understandable since they were cousins, not siblings. However, Elevra hadn't shown any sign that she knew anyone because she was practically a loner who liked being by herself. She has been quite the weird one since we were little. Always ruthless to bullies in school, but avoided making friends. Not that she isn't approachable, but it's just a little hard to explain. She has always voiced out how she was going to vanquish evil from this world due to an incident she went through in our childhood days. Sorry, I can't reveal that to you guys. Eldris voiced out the last part with a slightly apologetic look. Damn, she's so fine. But she never showed any interest even when I tried sending her signals, E voiced out with a wry smile. The only time she ever showed interest was during fights and sparring sessions. I never won against her. Not even once. I'm older, but she's stronger. Knowing her well, she probably wants to spar with Gustav because she can sense that his strength is higher than what he has shown so far, Eldris explained. I see. She's quite interesting, Gustav said with a look of interest. So I'm not the only one that can tell that Gustav is higher than the 5th position he was placed in on the cadet ranking board, Falco stated. Of course, we all know that for some reason Gustav hasn't revealed the full extent of his abilities, E responded while turning to face Gustav. What does that matter? The ranking is not important, Gustav stated, not denying or revealing anything. I am also interested in sparring with Gustav at full strength, Eldris revealed with an excited expression shown on his face. I'm not even thinking about defeating Elevra yet. I can't underestimate her since I haven't seen the full extent of her abilities yet, Gustav stated, but he couldn't deny the fact that he was interested in her. She seemed to have an interesting personality that was a bit similar to Angie's in the sense of justice. However, Gustav could sense that Elevra was much more harder than Angie. He sensed a dangerous vibe from her at the time they had a brief conversation 2 weeks back. He could tell that she had killed several times before. The 3 of them, Eldris excluded, made their decisions on challenges to accept and sent the report back to the hall where issues like that were sorted. Gustav picked 2 people from Matilda's party and one of those so-called rich kids who intended to use high-end gadgets and weaponry to battle him. One of the people he picked was the green-haired kid who said some words to him the other day in front of the simulation room, Dietrich. Gustav and the others later visited one of the training halls together to go do some personal training. The night went by in a flash, and the late cadets were once again awoken by the sound of the morning alarm, which reverberated across the entire camp, announcing that they had only 30 seconds to arrive on the field. Chapter 397. Practically all the cadets were already awake before the alarm rang out and were gathered at the field for the morning routine. No one was interested in going 2 laps for the morning routine, so they made sure to arrive earlier. Everyone was looking energetic this morning. They were looking forward to how the day was going to turn out. Those who had issued challenges most especially were hoping they had been picked to battle the special class cadets they issued out their challenges to. Gustav arrived on the scene with Eldris, and the rest before the alarm even rang out. Everyone arrived quite early today. You maggots seem to be in high spirits, Officer Bryant voiced out with a burst of laughter. Good. As you all know, the Special Class Cadets Duel Challenge is taking place today. By 10 a.m., those involved are to gather in Battle Arena number 7. Everyone else can decide to come and spectate if they want to. Besides the morning routine, all other training sessions are canceled for the day. Your points will also be allocated by the end of the day, Officer Bryant announced. The cadets nodded in response as they voiced out, "Understood, instructor. All special class cadets are expected to be in attendance," he added. Well, except for the new one that just arrived. Since he's just arriving, no challenge was issued out to him, so Indrik Oslov is exempted, Officer Bryant voiced out, causing all the cadets to look around with a look of contemplation. This was when some of them noticed the new youngster in their midst. Although it was impossible for all the cadets to know each other due to their numbers, which were over 1,000, they would still recognize someone that they had seen before. And this kid was someone who they were just seeing here for the first time. He had curly black hair, was about 5'6" in height, and was handsome but extremely haughty. He looked at everyone around him like they were lesser creatures. Hey, who is this kid and why is he just arriving? Indrik Oslov? He's also a special class. Why does he look so familiar? He looks quite strong. Maybe B might make to the top 50 cadet ranking board. The chatters of the cadets could be heard as everyone focused on Indrik's current position. Indrik has arrived? Cadets from Plankton City had widened eyes as they spotted Indrik's figure. Those who had passed the first test initially, but were unable to become special classes, remembered how much of a bully he was. Some of them who ended up being his victims swallowed saliva as they subconsciously shrank back. Angie, who happened to be not too far away from his position with Glade and Matilda, stared at Indrik with a conflicted expression. Silent rage started building up in her heart as she stared at him, intensely remembering everything that happened in the neighborhood. Indrik turned to the side and made eye contact with her. Smirk. A smirk appeared on his face as he winked and turned back to look forward. Why does it look like he didn't learn his lesson? Angie thought. Gustav stared in the direction at which everyone was looking from the corner of his eyes. The brat has finally arrived. Looks like the little one has arrived. I heard from an anonymous source that he was serving penalty for some misconduct, Eldris said to Gustav. Yeah, he was, apparently. Gustav responded. Apart from the reduction in body width ID, say there's nothing different about him. Maybe he didn't really serve any penalty, Falco said with a look of uncertainty. Hey, what are y'all whispering about? Do y'all know that kid? E was the only one lost here. Yeah, he is Gustav's little brother, Falco revealed. What? That arrogant-looking runt is Gustav's kid brother? E subconsciously shouted out, causing others in the vicinity to stare in their direction. Will you fucking lower your voice? Falco cussed after hearing E shout out. What? That kid is Gustav's little brother? Now I understand why he looked familiar. Oh my gosh, we have 2 special class siblings. They'll be unbeatable. But why do they not share the same last name? Why didn't you tell me you had a little brother? E said with a look of excitement. Because I dawned. Before Gustav could respond, Officer Bryant stomped his feet on the ground, causing everyone to concentrate on him. This morning, you all won't be running round the course like usual, he said with a look of mysteriousness. The cadets had looks of confusion as they heard that, wondering what Officer Bryant had in mind. Your everyday morning routine with your bloodline sealed was only to increase the strength of your bodies for the technique I'm about to pass down today, he explained with a profound look. I will be sealing your bloodlines again before imparting this technique to you all, he added before gesturing for everyone to sit on the grass field. The cadets did as they were told and sat cross-legged as Officer Bryant dashed across the place, sealing their bloodlines again. Sasha, Ibrahim, help me with the impartation of the technique. Officer Bryant called out to his assistants after he finished sealing the bloodlines of every single cadet. He initially paused in front of Indrik earlier, contemplating whether his body could bear it. Still, Indrik assured him that there were no worries. Officer Bryant recalled that his report said Indrik had been in secluded training with his bloodline nearly sealed completely. Hence, he figured there wouldn't be any issues. The 3 officers began from 3 different positions in the crowd of cadets that were currently sitting cross-legged on the field. Officer Bryant squatted behind the first cadet in front and poked out 2 fingers from his right hand before stabbing it into the cadet's spinal area. The cadet moaned in pain, but Officer Bryant asked him to stay still. Shwai. Shwai. Officer Bryant's fingers ran across the middle of his back twice, tightly pressed against the cadet's spinal area. Chapter 398. Officer Bryant's fingers ran across the middle of his back twice and tightly pressed against the cadet's spinal area. Then he moved to his shoulders and poked them twice before giving the cadet a chop at the back of his neck. All this time, the cadet had been screaming because his body had been going through excruciating pains. The instant Officer Bryant's palm slammed into the back of his neck, he felt a sharp, stinging pain from the middle of his chest. It was so painful and peppery that the cadet groaned loudly. Now hold that energy in your chest area. Prevent it from moving or dissolving. Let it keep accumulating. The higher it accumulates, the more you can use this technique to improve your strength, Officer Bryant instructed before moving on to the next cadet. The same scene played out again as Officer Bryant performed the same action with the former one. His assistants were also doing the same thing to other cadets in different places. After 10 minutes, He got to Gustav's position and started performing the same action on Gustav. The moment Officer Brandt's finger poked into his back, Gustav understood why the other cadets had been screaming in pain the whole time. It was truly excruciatingly painful. Gustav moaned in a low tone as Officer Bryant ran his pointed fingers across the middle of his back. Just what is this thing? I can feel a kind of energy building up in my chest area, Gustav sensed. The moment Officer Bryant's palm collided with the back of his neck, Gustav felt his vision darken as the energy gathering in his chest area increased immensely. His whole body, at this point, was in pain as his chest heaved up and down. Hold that energy in your chest area. Although his senses felt woozy at the moment, he heard Officer Bryant words. Gustav wondered if others felt as intense as he did. He bore the pain and held onto the energy within that kept accumulating as seconds passed. Every cadet that had gone through that had their chest perked out and could be seen breathing in and out profusely. About an hour later, every cadet had undergone the same thing and was holding whatever energy they had gathered within their chest area. A lot of them were already close to releasing it because they couldn't hold on anymore. Pay attention. That energy gathered at your chest area is called serhavo. It can only be harnessed at the peak of your growth stage, which is now, and it can only be harnessed once throughout the lifetime of a mixed blood. So this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Officer Bryant announced. There are two ways it can help you. The first is that it will help expand the arteries and veins connected to your bloodlines, which in turn causes a chain reaction where you can channel your bloodline twice as fast or twice as fast as before. The second is that it draws out a hidden potential within your bloodline, unlocking a powerful bloodline ability. The effectiveness is based mostly on how much you can hold on to it and stop it from dissolving within your body prematurely. For it to work, your bloodline has to be in a dormant state, which is the reason for the seal. Also, to gather the energy, your body must be ordinary like that of a human, which is another reason for the seal and the daily routines. If your bodies hasn't undergone training while your bloodlines were sealed, a lot of you will have passed out while I was imparting it, which would have made everything useless, Officer Bryant explained. The cadets now understood after listening to his explanation, but they wondered if the morning routine would continue after today. Now if you cannot hold on to it any longer, you need to pass it from place to place across your body for it to dissolve without sending your body into a state of shock, he added and began to explain the procedure with more details. Those that couldn't hold on any longer did as they were told, and in a few seconds, the energy had dissolved within their body. They had looks of relief as they felt the pain on their bodies lessen. Officer Bryant went on to unseal their bloodlines, and every one of them had looks of astonishment as they observed their body. Officer Bryant permitted them to dismiss themselves after they were done, since there was nothing left to do here today. Some cadets who had the action performed on them later than the others were still able to hold on to theirs. A few strong normal cadets and the special class cadets still held on to theirs, waiting for the energy to accumulate more than the others to achieve maximum effect. Gustav was drenched in his sweat at this point, but still held on. He put himself in a posture where he was able to manage the pain his body was experiencing by breathing properly. Another hour passed, and the number of cadets still holding on had dwindled to around 30. Even special class cadets had dropped out at this point and unsealed their bloodlines. Currently, there was only one non-special class cadet in the midst of 29 special class cadets. Angie and Falco had dropped out some time ago, but Matilda and Glade were still holding on. Gustav, E.E., and Eldris were also holding on. Elevera had a sweat-soaked face, but her expression was like that of Gustav's, unbothered. In fact, she even looked more like she wasn't in any pain. Unlike Gustav, whose forehead would occasionally crease like he was in the toilet trying to pass a hard shit, more and more of them began to drop out, and in a few more minutes, only 8 cadets were left. Gustav, E.E., Eldris, Chad, Elevera, Indrik, Chutlu, and Dietrich. Shoot was the number 4 ranked cadet before Gustav, while Dietrich was not even a special class, yet he had held on for this long. This amazed a lot of them that were watching from the sideline. They were waiting to see who would be the last. I can't hold on anymore. I'm signing out, guys, E voiced out as he performed the procedures necessary to finish up. Just as he dropped out, so did Chutlu and Chad. At this point, Only Gustav, Ildris, Elevra, and Indrik were the special classes left. Indrik seemed to still have a lot of spunk in him as he held on with a proud expression on his face. "Hey, I can help you double the effect if you want," Gustav suddenly heard the system voice out internally. Chapter 399. "Hey, I can help you double the effect if you want," the system suddenly voiced out internally. "What? Are you being serious right now?" Gustav asked. "Of course. That is if you meet up." The system replied cryptically. "Meet up with what?" Gustav questioned internally. 5, 4, 3. The system suddenly started counting down. Gustav wondered what it was up to. 1 and finally 0. Hidden quest completed. Accumulate Serhavo for up to 3 hours. This notification suddenly popped up in Gustav's line of sight. Gustav now realized that this was what the system was referring to when it mentioned meeting up. At that moment, also Ildris and Indrik ended their accumulation and stood up to unseal their bloodlines. Indrik threw Gustav a sharp gaze before moving away from the vicinity after his bloodline was unsealed. The cadets in the vicinity were extremely astonished that Indrik held on for this long and realized that he might just end up being among the top 10, just as some of them mentioned earlier. A lot of them were interested in seeing just how powerful he was. Seeing that he lasted this long, they couldn't help but wonder how both brothers were so talented. "Are you ready to release what you have accumulated so far?" the system asked. "Not yet. I can still hold on," Gustav responded internally, while raising his head up to stare at Elevra up ahead. Elevra also raised her head, and their eyes met. Gustav could see the calmness in her eyes, almost like she wasn't going through any pain. Just how high is her mental state? She seems so calm, like nothing can break her, Gustav wondered, not realizing that he was still staring into her eyes. What makes him so cold and uncaring? Just what has he gone through? Elevra had these thoughts running through her mind as well. "Well, let's see who's gonna back out first." Elevra and Gustav suddenly smirked as the exact same thought appeared in their minds. They both focused and kept holding on as long as they could. Moments turned to seconds, and seconds to minutes as another hour went by in the blink of an eye. The cadets witnessing this in the vicinity were extremely speechless at this moment as they stared at these two monsters. Some of them only lasted for about 30 minutes since the pain was unbearable. Those who lasted for up to an hour even bragged about it. Yet these two have been going at it for up to 4 hours now. "All right, that's enough, you two." Officer Bryant suddenly appeared in their midst. "Any more and you'll damage your body. Never heard the term, too much of everything is bad?" he added with a serious expression mixed in with a bit of playfulness. "Oh, so we should end it now?" Gustav asked. Officer Bryant nodded in response. "Don't damage your bodies. This is already enough." Gustav and Elevra decided to listen and started the procedure to stop the accumulation. "He's right. Any more and your body would be damaged, but your regeneration is still active at the moment. So you'd heal," the system stated while Gustav was in the process of ending the accumulation. "It's better to end it now, so there will be suspicions. Besides, I'm already exhausted." "I'm barely hanging on," Gustav responded as he continued spreading the Serhavo all across his internals. He and Elevra took longer, ending the accumulation process because they had accumulated so much of it. Gustav's body nearly went into shock because it felt like he was being electrocuted as the Serhavo dissolved. "Doubling effect now," the system suddenly voiced out in his head. Gustav had expected he would feel more pain. However, on the contrary, he felt coolness, like his internal organs were undergoing a form of therapeutic massage. After 2 more minutes, he was done. He and Elevra stood up at the same time, and Officer Bryant unsealed their bloodlines. Gustav felt his body become extremely lighter than before as his bloodlines began to function again. He could feel his entire being radiating with more energy than before. He tried channeling his bloodline for a moment and noticed the massive transformation. Gustav could tell that he would reach the next bloodline rank in no time with this amount of speed. Who knew the MBO had such a technique? No wonder they're the most powerful. Gustav thought about it and came to this realization. Everyone had gotten a massive boost from this. It had increased their channel speed, which meant that, unlike regular mixed bloods, they wouldn't have issues breaking through and channeling their bloodlines past the ranks that were tough to scale through. Gustav, good one. Elevera voiced out from up ahead before she started moving towards the path that led out of the field. Gustav stared at her back for a moment before turning around to the side to go meet up with E and the others who had been waiting for him all along. Race back to our dorm. Let's go, guys, Gustav said with a smile as he dashed forward. Flumsh. Falco and Eldris quickly followed after him, dashing forward into the distance. A cloud of dust was stirred up due to their speed. E dashed forward before he conjured a vortex in front, which made him appear several hundred feet ahead. Eldris crossed a couple hundred feet just by moving once. At the same time, Falco's alter ego took over and leaped across the air, leaving a blurry black afterimage in his wake. Minutes later, Gustav was in his apartment channeling his bloodline within one of the small rooms. At this time, it was only a few minutes to 10 a.m., so Gustav opened his eyes after several more minutes of channeling. It's time to go, he said internally as he picked himself up and moved out of his apartment. And the others were already waiting. They decided to head towards Battle Arena number 7 together. Second chapter will be out in a few hours. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.